Chapter 448. Lux didn't know if it was because he looked like an angel, or if he used some kind of ability when he turned into an angel. But this time, the skinny girl didn't run away like a naughty kitten. She obediently let him catch her. After that, Lux used his water gun to extract the UK from the girl's body, and transferred it to a container that looked like an aluminum lunchbox commonly seen in the 1980s. The girl immediately lost consciousness after her UK was extracted. If Su Shenxing hadn't supported her in time, she would have collapsed on the lawn. Lux fired a shot at his temple to turn himself back into an ordinary human. He carried the girl on his back and seemed to be planning to send her back to the hospital bed. Was that a transformation ability? Su Shenxing asked curiously. No, it's just that I stored the template of my own race and the template of this world's humans in the gun. So as long as the gun is still there, I can freely switch between these two templates. Lux replied. Then he smiled and added in a low voice. In fact, in addition to these two templates, there are some templates of the indigenous people of other worlds in the gun database of the General Archon. After all, in our line of work, it's normal for us to run around everywhere, so it's better to be prepared. But I applied for this gun again, so the database is still in the default state. There are no other templates stored. By the way, Lux's previous gun exploded when it was measuring the amount of information Su Shenxing had. So as long as there are templates, can it also become a very powerful creature? Su Shenxing asked. That depends on the amount of information. Not only can the gun store too much information, but it may also affect the Archon's thinking when it's reconstructed, so it's not allowed. On the other hand, because the information of a high-dimensional creature like the four-element whale doesn't belong to this dimension, it needs to go through a high-dimensional conversion to store it in the gun, so it can't directly change the template. Finally, he concluded, in short, there are quite a lot of restrictions. Although Lux said so, even Su Shenxing could understand that this technology of reconstructing matter and even living things through information was very impressive. It was no wonder that the civilization developed a super-organization like the Space Administration. Therefore, his interest in the Space Administration grew. No matter how Su Shenxing said that he was just an ordinary person, he knew very well that as long as Mo Li was by his side and the sacred sword was not broken, then he would still be involved in the turmoil of the world. In this way, there might be many opportunities to deal with this organization called the Space Administration in the future. Perhaps it wouldn't be a bad thing to take this opportunity to get to know the other party a little better. Speaking of which, how long will I be staying at the Space Administration this time? With this in mind, Su Shenxing finally asked a more serious question. If everything goes well, one day will be enough. Even if it doesn't go well, I guarantee that it won't be more than 3 days. Lux confidently guaranteed. And what's even more incredible is that the Space Administration's datum world's time flow is almost the same as this world's. It's just that every day is 1 second shorter than this world's. Su Shenxing calculated in his mind. He found that if he applied for leave in advance, then even if he disappeared for 3 days, it wouldn't be a problem. Only then did he nod his head in satisfaction. While they were talking, they had already returned to the ward and put the girl back on the bed. As a reward, when I extracted the UK from her body, I left behind some civilian inventions that are slightly more advanced than this world's technology in her brain. Lux wiped the sweat off his forehead and said with satisfaction, as long as she's a little smarter, with the patents of those inventions, she can at least live without worries. Su Shenxing didn't feel that his actions were wrong. Maybe for this little girl who had no one to rely on, this kind of ending was already considered quite good. Even though they needed to travel across worlds, Lux made it sound very easy. According to him, the travel time would be less than an hour, which was even shorter than taking a car from Jiangjin to southern Chu, Chentua's hometown. So Su Shenxing didn't feel like he was going on a long journey. Therefore, he didn't make any preparations. He only brought back Mo Li, who was still working, or rather, causing trouble for the shop owner, and sent a text to Song Yu and Qin Xingyan. After comforting the dog girl, he planned to leave. In fact, Su Shenxing also wanted to bring the others along to broaden their horizons. However, when he thought about how other than Mo Li, the other people in Sakura's apartment didn't seem to have the ability to translate. Qin Xingyan's thought steal was ineffective against the Space Administration's mine protection equipment. He could only give up on this idea. After sitting on the shuttle car, the three of them officially set off. Finally, the rustic Wuling Hongguang returned to its original sci-fi appearance. The shuttle easily passed through the world barrier and arrived at the still turbulent sea of ether. Outside the world barrier, Lux's ship was quietly hovering there. Like his gun, The ship had been completely repaired. It was completely different from the broken ship that Su Shenxing and the others had crashed into with Jiang Yu's head. Other things aside, just the cyberpunk feeling of the ship's paint made Su Shenxing feel that the Space Administration was indeed worthy of its name. Speaking of which, what does this 6-2 on the ship mean? Su Shenxing saw 2 words painted on the side of the ship and couldn't help but ask curiously. You recognize these words? However, Lux was surprised that Su Shenxing could recognize the 2 words. Well, you can see it as some of my special abilities. Su Shenxing thought that this shouldn't be something taboo as he explained to the other party. Fortunately, after hearing what he said, Lux did not have any other special reaction. He just introduced it to Su Shenxing and the others. This is the Spirit World language, also known as the Ancient Mid-Serta language. It is the original language of the Datum Point world and is also a rare language with power in the multiverse world. However, the number on it only represents my number, or my seat. He explained to Su Shenxing and the others, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. After the 7th seat, Ing, returned to the Space Administration, because the seats of the other deacons were delayed accordingly, it didn't cause too much of a disturbance. It was not until then that the upper management of the Space Administration realized that many deacons valued this very much. Those high-ranking bigwigs studied it and felt that healthy competition could be encouraged. Since it didn't cost them money, why not give it a try? Therefore, they simply expanded the number of seats to 100 on the basis of the original 10 seats. Moreover, the paint of the seats was changed from the original multiverse universal language to the ancient Mid-Serta language. Of course, the top 10 seats were still the most valuable. Only they could be called executors and had the right to make decisions on behalf of the Space Administration in the true sense. Although Lux's number, which was neither too high nor too low, represented a certain degree of honor, after all, there were millions of deacons. It was already very impressive to be able to squeeze into the top 100. In fact, other than getting an extra year-end bonus, it didn't have any F*King use. On the contrary, because he became a seat holder, he was envied by many of his colleagues. Many of the deacons who were his peers or seniors were sharpening their swords, wanting to compete with him in a healthy way, making Lux miserable. Actually, I'm not at the level of a seat holder, but the organization has decided. What can I do? Perhaps it was because he finally found an outlet to vent. Lux poured out his grievances to Su Shenxing without stopping. If you ask me, maybe it's because you took care of that ancient 4-element giant whale last time, which made the Space Administration HQ's evaluation of me inexplicably higher. That's why it's like this. So it's my fault? Su Shenxing spread his hands and said unhappily. However, this also dispelled Su Shenxing's doubts. Although the technology was amazing, Lux's combat power was still a little weak. If this kind of rank could be ranked 62, then his evaluation of the Space Administration would probably be lowered a little. In short, it's really tiring to walk with this halo. I'm now waiting for those people to surpass me, so that I can take the title of a seat holder. Lux was still chattering on. However, his hands did not stop as he controlled the shuttle to fly into the execution ship. Compared to the exterior changes of the execution ship, there were not many obvious changes on the interior. Even the layout was no different from the previous ship. After Su Shenxing expressed his doubts, Lux smiled bitterly. This ship is an assembly line product. Of course, the things that are mass-produced on the assembly line are exactly the same. However, the execution ship of the executors is much better than ours. In addition, the seat holder can also modify the interior of the execution ship to a certain extent. However, I'm going to lose my seat sooner or later, so it's better not to change it. As they spoke, they came to the bridge. The bridge also did not change much. However, this time, Emily did not find the cat food used to attract the Cheshire Cat in the original cupboard. When Su Shenxing took a stroll on the bridge, the execution ship started under the control of Lux. It takes a certain amount of time and energy to travel through the Sea of Ether, but once you're on the route of the Space Administration, the speed will be much faster. Your world belongs to the 4th type of world, unconfirmed world. There are no fixed routes around it, so it takes so much time. Otherwise, it would only take a whoosh to reach it. Lux said proudly. Chapter 449. Just like Lux said, after sailing for less than an hour, his ship was on a route from the Space Administration. Looking out from the bridge, it gave people the feeling that they were in a time tunnel in Doryman. It was very magical. According to Lux, the so-called route was not the route of ships or planes on Earth, but more like the deep ocean currents. Once one entered, they would be taken to the destination world. It was a special road built by the Space Administration using artificial simulated ether flow. The original intention of building these routes was to make the communication between the second type of world, sovereign world, faster and more efficient. They used artificial simulated ether flow to carry information and achieve information exchange between the two worlds. But later, they discovered that this technology was also effective on the executive ship, which could also be informatized to a certain extent. So, what was originally just a telephone line became a highway dedicated to the executive ship, and it was the kind that had a catapult acceleration effect in racing games. After a moment, the mysterious smoke tunnel outside the bridge suddenly faded away. What appeared in front of Su Shunxing was a huge shining silver planet. Seeing Su Shunxing's surprised expression, Lux grinned and showed a satisfied smile. "Welcome to the Space Administration, I think you'll like it here." "It doesn't look good." After a few seconds of silence, Emoli stared at the planet outside the window and muttered to himself. The Datum world, or it could also be called the Mid-Serta world. This was the origin of the Space Administration. But the universe of this world was very small. The number of large celestial bodies was less than 100,000. After the ancient Mid-Serta people finished exploring the universe, they came to a conclusion. If they couldn't get out of this world, they would eventually be destroyed due to energy exhaustion. So they desperately researched, and finally, after a big explosion that almost turned the universe into a pot of soup, they successfully opened a wormhole to another world. But they didn't directly invade other worlds like locusts in some cultural works, and began to wantonly occupy resources to strengthen themselves. Instead, they gathered everyone's wisdom to study the wormhole, and finally mastered the super technology of crossing worlds. Until then, they began to go to other worlds and take care not to affect the development of the world's original civilization to collect the resources they needed. When they reached the peak of their development, they also noticed the dangers that could bring destruction in the cracks of countless worlds. Dimensional tremors, dimensional migration, giant whales that gnawed at the origin. In order to deal with these dangers that could destroy a world at any time, the Space Administration was established. Su Shunxing listened to Lux talk about the past of the Space Administration as if he was listening to a story, and at the same time, he also followed him into the building. They were planning to go through the portal to the planet where the tribunal was located. Because the Mid-Serta universe was very small, almost every usable planet had a corresponding building complex. The planet they were on now, in the words of Earth, was just a parking lot. Executive ships or other ships with the ability to travel that came to the Mid-Serta universe through the pseudo-etheric route would come to this planet, and then dock the ship on this hollowed-out planet, and then go through the portal on the planet to where they wanted to go. The portal's shape was similar to a box elevator, but it looked more like an enlarged version of a coffin. This always reminded Su Shunxing of the subtle aesthetic of a certain super race in a novel. "Hello, Dimensional Executive. Where are you heading to in the Sea of Stars?" As soon as he walked into the coffin, he could hear a deep female voice that was as low as a subwoofer, but it was enough to shake people's hearts. Su Shunxing's body trembled, and he thought to himself, F***CK, they actually let someone with such a voice do the voiceover. The Mid-Serta natives have a really strong taste. "To the tribunal. The identities of the other two people who came with you are not in the database. This is the suspect who will be going to the tribunal." Although he was already mentally prepared, when he heard Lux introduce himself like this, Su Shunxing was still a little unhappy. "This is..." Lux was about to introduce Emoli, but the girl said in a serious tone, "I'm the landlord's defense lawyer." Confirmation complete. Then, 3 translucent screens the size of business cards appeared in front of Su Shunxing and the others. Lux's screen said, "Executive Lux, arrest operation." Su Shunxing's screen said, "Suspect X, trial." Emoli's screen said, "Defense lawyer, rescue mission." "This is the identity information, the pass to Mid-Serta," Lux explained to Su Shunxing and the others. Then, the surrounding green light lit up, and then dimmed again. "Is this thing broken?" Su Shunxing asked curiously. "No, it's already here." Following Lux's explanation, the coffin. The portal door suddenly opened. The world outside was much more beautiful than the parking lot planet. Although there were still rows upon rows of towering golden buildings, there were still small patches of green on the ground. Looking from afar, there was even a huge lake and a building completely submerged in the lake. Could that be the remains of the old era? Su Shunxing thought to himself. They actually still kept that kind of thing. It seems that the people of Mid-Serta are quite romantic. The intelligent creatures of some worlds are aquatic, so they will go to those places to be tried. Lux saw Su Shinxing's gaze fall on the big lake, so he explained to Su Shinxing, in the past, there was actually no such facility. Those aquatic creatures were basically placed in fish tanks and pushed to the tribunal. But later on, the inhabitants of a second-type world, sovereign world, were treated this way and protested. They complained that the tribunal discriminated against aquatic civilizations, so later on, they specially dug a lake and built that thing. Give me back my momentary admiration. Because the function of this planet was similar to a court, the people here were either staff members, or the people who were going to be tried or their relatives. Along the way, it was an eye-opener for Su Shinxing. Many of the people here looked strange, more like aliens than otherworlders. Even though Su Shinxing had traversed through thousands of worlds, he had never seen so many otherworlders. For some reason, in the otherworlders he had been to, most of the intelligent creatures were humanoid, and most of them were no different from humans. Chapter 450. Amam. While Su Shinxing was still marveling at the rare sight, Emoli's cheeks were puffed up as if he was eating something. Emoli? Su Shinxing could not help but sigh. Spit it out. Don't eat anything. Emoli stared at Su Shinxing for a few seconds like a groundhog before spitting something on the ground. The little girl then stuck out her tongue and said with a strange expression, Mr. Landlord, it tastes like a goblin. It doesn't taste good. Su Shinxing was speechless. He then turned his gaze to the thing that Emoli almost ate. It was a palm-sized creature with a green body and a pair of dragonfly wing-like organs on its back. At first glance, it looked a bit like a fairy from a fairy tale. But its head completely destroyed this beautiful impression. It was a potato that was rough and full of wrinkles and roots like a mandrake from the demonic realm. At the top of its head where the hair should be, there was a green bud the size of half a pinky finger. It looked quite funny. If one looked closely, they would find that the potato, or rather the creature's head, had human-like facial features. Ignoring the two holes in its ears, the creature's face was full of wrinkles and looked like an old man, the kind that was ugly when he was young. It wiped the saliva off its body and looked dizzy. It seemed that it had not recovered from the aftermath of the surprise attack just now. No wonder Emoli would treat this guy as food. From the looks of its head, it was not much different from the roots of a mandrake. Su Shinxing had eaten that thing before. Although its original effect of accelerating mana recovery was not useful to him, it tasted good and was much better than the average potato. At this time, Lux, who had also noticed this, changed his expression and exclaimed, "The presiding judge?" What? It seemed that the situation was not good. The herbaceous creature that was almost eaten by Emoli was the presiding judge who presided over Su Shinxing's trial. Judging from the other party's sickly appearance, almost being swallowed by the jasmine pill just now must have caused considerable physical and psychological damage to it. Although Su Shinxing did not take the trial to heart, there were many who wanted to put him on trial, but so far no one had succeeded. But based on the situation just now, Emoli was indeed in the wrong. Emoli. Su Shinxing could not help but put on a stern face and said to Emoli righteously, "Don't eat random things in the future, understand?" What? Emoli nodded in reply. Is that the place to be taught a lesson? Lux could not help but complain. Because there was still a short period of time before the trial began, in order to avoid being witnessed by more people, the three of them had to find a more remote place for the time being. It was the green area in the building, a garden formed by vines as thick as a person's wrist. There were also grapes the size of basins in the garden, but when passers-by approached them, their faces would appear, and they would use a magnetic male voice to ask the passers-by if they had any difficulties and provide answers. And if the passers-by said they were thirsty or hungry, they would control the vines and pluck off their faces to satisfy the passers-by's hunger. However, the scene was very frightening. Su Shinxing had already seen several passers-by who were frightened. Speaking of which, why were there so many plant aliens here? Lux obviously kept a respectful distance from these grape aliens. He bought a bottle of water from a robot that looked a bit like a trash can and poured it on the presiding judge's head. To be precise, he poured it on the little sprout on its head. After a while, the little sprout grew a little bigger at a speed visible to the naked eye, and its 2 leaves turned into 3. The palm-sized potato sprite also woke up. Strange. I seem to have experienced something incredible just now. It shivered, and its eyes became much clearer. It seemed to have forgotten that it was almost eaten just now. Then it saw Lux holding the bottle of water. Isn't this Lux? Did you bring the suspect? Lux used his gun to disintegrate the remaining half of the bottle of water into an information state, then said to the presiding judge, "Yes. Let me introduce him to you. No need, before the trial. We don't have any personal contact with the suspect. This is the rule of us judges." The potato sprite raised a toothpick-like hand to stop Lux, then spoke in a bureaucratic tone. But immediately after, its eyes moved away from Su Shenxing and fell on Emoli, who was next to Su Shenxing. Then, like a nightmare waking up, it half knelt on Lux's palm with its head covered in cold sweat. By the way, its sweat was green. It muttered in a frightened voice, so dark, so scary. "Lux, can't you use your omnipotent gun to think of a way?" Su Shenxing could only helplessly say. Since Lux's gun could leave a high-tech mark in the brain of a vegetative girl, then a certain degree of memory modification shouldn't be a problem. Then in theory, it should be possible to slightly modify the memory of this potato sprite and repair its psychological trauma. As for why Su Shenxing didn't do it himself, it was simple. The reason was actually very simple. Because the other party was a plant, Su Shenxing really didn't know how much strength he would have to use to physically modify the potato's memory without destroying it. Similarly, Emoli's memory manipulation magic didn't target plants. Unfortunately, this won't work. Lux waved the water gun in its hand and said helplessly, "In order to prevent abuse of the executive officer's gun, the gun itself has a set of restrictions. It's forbidden for other members of the Space Administration and high-level people of the second type of world, Sovereign World. In addition, in order to ensure the fairness of the trial, the presiding judge himself has his own high-security database. I can't hack into it with a gun of my level." "That's awkward." Su Shenxing scratched his head. Emoli was a defense lawyer, so he definitely had to attend the trial. Now that the presiding judge would have a psychological trauma whenever he saw Emoli, there was no way he could carry out a normal trial, right? "It can't be helped," Lux said with a bitter smile. "We can only take one step at a time." The trial began very quickly. After watering it again, the bud on the presiding judge's head grew a little bigger, and the other party finally calmed down. And Jasmine was also ordered by Su Shenxing to turn invisible for the time being. The consequence of this was that on that day, many otherworlders who came here to do business from other worlds witnessed a supernatural incident. 2 grapes with human faces floated in the air and then mysteriously disappeared. After that, this incident spread to many worlds and became an urban legend. From the legend, the vanishing grape was born, a terrifying demon that could attack the spherical organs on the bodies of living creatures, causing countless people to tremble in fear at the mere mention of it. Of course, this was all in the future. After the presiding judge woke up, it forgot about Emoli. After it greeted Lux, it spread its dragonfly wings and flew to the trial. From its hurried appearance, even if it didn't remember Emoli's existence, it still seemed to be afraid. "For the trial, do I have to do anything?" Su Shenxing followed Lux to the trial and asked, "For example, handcuffs and shackles. Can that kind of thing restrain you?" Lux asked in amusement. "Something symbolic?" Su Shenxing replied casually. "Then isn't it fine?" Lux shrugged and said, "Actually, according to historical records, the suspects did have to wear restraints during the trial. But because it was difficult to tailor restraints for the people who came to this planet for trial, the trial later gave up on this setting." As it spoke, Lux pointed at an otherworld creature not far away. The creature looked like a giant. It was about 50 stories tall, and its whole body was covered in rotting black muscle fibers. Its hands and feet were made of rotting muscle fibers, and its head was a huge tentacle that looked like a tongue. With every step it took, the building Su Shenxing and the others were in trembled slightly. Just its existence alone was enough to spread chaos and terror to the surroundings. For a creature like that, there's no way to use normal restraints. If we specially make restraints for it and use them to restrain it, its boss is like a meatball. That guy will come to this world to protest. After all, that guy is a rare creature that can travel through multiple worlds. In terms of seniority, it might be even older than the Space Administration. The higher-ups of the Space Administration had a headache over this. For example, although some creatures have hands, they actually rely on the tentacles on their chin to move. Normal restraints are really no different from decorations. Lux spread out its hands. So in the end, they still cancelled the restraints. "You should relax a little. It feels a little strange. Su Shenxing listened patiently to what Lux had to say. After scratching his face, he followed Lux into the designated trial. Because there were many types and sizes of otherworld people, the trial had many different specifications. It was worth mentioning that although there was only one entrance for each specification of the trial, the rooms behind the door overlapped in a dimensional state. So after everyone entered, they would be in a different room, and they would not be able to see who had entered first. In addition, although they could see the presiding judge, what they could see was in fact a projection of the staff from another dimension. Therefore, the people on trial would not be able to attack the legal staff. Another dimension? That little thing is actually a powerhouse on the level of the four-element giant whale? Hearing Lux's introduction, Su Shenxing could not help but be a little surprised. Well, actually, it's not as powerful as it sounds. The presiding judge does not have the ability to go to a higher dimension. It's just that through encrypted information, they can reach a 3-5-dimensional platform built by the Space Administration that is mixed between the 3-dimensional and 4-dimensional space. Lux replied with a bitter smile. Although it's not a problem to use it to escape, it doesn't have any combat ability. In fact, when many otherworld people first heard of this situation, they would be like Su Shenxing. In fact, it was not that powerful. It was just that this kind of power that could shuttle between higher dimensions could almost ignore any confinement in this world and escape. Although it was so powerful, it still could not escape from Mo Li's mouth and stomach. In addition, the act of placing the suspect alone in an independent space was actually a kind of restriction imposed by the Space Administration on the suspect after the removal of the restraining props. If the suspect refused to accept the verdict and wanted to escape, the space would be directly sealed off, and it would be an indestructible space prison. Of course, whether or not it could be destroyed depended on the situation, except for existences at the level of Su Shenxing and Mo Li. Anyway, Lux had already guaranteed that Su Shenxing would be fine, so at first Su Shenxing just planned to go in and walk out. However, reality once again exceeded his expectations. When he stepped into the entrance of the courtroom, the overlapping dimensions behind the door began to shake. Some of the dimensions that were not well solidified because not many people used them directly collided with each other and were annihilated. In short, the entire overlapping dimension was in a mess. The Space Administration's dimensional sensor immediately sensed the abnormality here, and suddenly an ear-piercing alarm sounded throughout the entire building. At this time, the initiator of all this, Su Shenxing, looked at the distorted scene in front of him in a daze. He could not help but be at a loss. Fortunately, Luke reached out and pulled him out in time. Otherwise, after crashing through those dimensions, he would have fallen into some unknown corner of the world's gap. What's going on? Su Shenxing asked Lux. I don't know. Lux looked at the gradually cracking doorframe and was also confused. This is the first time I've seen this happen. The Space Administration's response was quite fast. Not long after, troops wearing futuristic mechanical armor surrounded the building. At the same time, a group of mechanical armors with a different paint job entered the building first. From the paint job, it seemed like they were an ambulance team. After Lux revealed his identity to them, he left with Su Shenxing and Mo Li. It seemed that the trial could not be carried out for the time being. How about, Su Shenxing thought for a few seconds and suggested to Lux. Let's go eat lunch first. Chapter 451. As the location of the Space Administration, Mid-Sirta was basically the center of the multidimensional world by its influence. But even in Mid-Sirta, the position of the administrator was extremely high. For a small matter like bringing otherworlders to a restaurant to eat, they could just show their faces. However, our hero still underestimated the degree of responsibility and strangeness of this world's population. Forget about things like heavy oil, helium-3, and photonic energy batteries, USB Universal Interface, that didn't look like food, but the names of the things that were probably food also made people feel subtly uneasy. What is this rainbow sautéed? Su Shenxing pointed at the name of a dish on the menu and asked Lux. But Lux didn't know about this either, so he opened the virtual screen on the table. A virtual bust the size of a figurine appeared on the dining table. It bowed to everyone politely before asking, "Excuse me, sir, how can I help you?" Lux repeated Su Shenxing's question. Thus, the other party began to answer their questions seriously. The raw material of the rainbow sautéed is the vomit of a kind of herbivorous orc from the second type world of Papa Mill. After adding in the clouds that appear in rainbows, it is stir-fried. Su Shenxing didn't have the habit of eating vomit, just like how he didn't deliberately drink coffee brewed from animal excrement when he was on Earth. So he changed to another dish on the menu. What is this salt-baked police car with an explosion effect? This time, without waiting for the other party to answer, Su Shenxing saw a police car the size of a remote-controlled race car rushing out of the restaurant and running around in all directions. Immediately, a chubby chef holding a milk pot and a glass bottle also came out of the restaurant. The glass bottle in his hand was constantly exploding, the kind of scenes that were commonly seen on movie screens, repeating over and over again. With agile movements that were completely different from his bloated body, he grabbed the police car and threw it into the milk pot with a clang. Just like that, he returned to the restaurant while cursing. The salt-baked police car with an explosion effect is the materialization of a certain kind of information, a favorite food of information creatures. The information content is not small, and it is thrilling, so it is widely praised. But carbon-based creatures won't feel full after eating it, so I don't recommend you to order this. Or rather, that thing can't be eaten at all? Su Shenxing criticized in his heart. Because the jurisdiction of the Space Administration is very large, and in recent years, there have been more and more second-type worlds, sovereign worlds, that are willing to be directly under the jurisdiction of the Space Administration. This caused a lot of problems while the Space Administration is developing rapidly, Lux explained to Su Shenxing. For example, the appearance of many intelligent creatures that are similar to wild animals and even livestock in captivity, so when the intelligent creatures of other creatures eat their livestock, they may anger the intelligent creatures of the other world. In fact, disputes have caused many conflicts, dimensional wars. Dimensional wars. The most famous one was the war between the Huya world and the Huya world. In the end, the Huya world was even destroyed because of this. Lux looked like he was lamenting. Although we rushed over to maintain the stability of the dimension, a world full of intelligent creatures died just like that. That feeling was very uncomfortable. Anyway, because of this reason, the food in the Space Administration is basically the type of ordinary home-cooked food in the more common worlds. And to prevent conflicts, there are basically no meat dishes. But there doesn't seem to be any dishes from Earth? Su Shenxing looked at the menu from beginning to end. Because Earth is a fourth-type world, unconfirmed world, its dishes naturally won't appear in this place, Lux explained. So troublesome. Forget it, give me a serving of grapes. In the end, Su Shenxing could only choose the world on the menu that looked more familiar. Lux looked like he wanted to say something, but in the end, he did not say anything. About 3 minutes later, the grapes Su Shenxing ordered were brought to the table by the robot waiter. That's right, it was the head of the grape who took off his head and gave it to others. I've had enough of this restaurant. Su Shenxing roared in his heart. In the end, the food was eaten by Mo Li. Since he could not find anything to eat in the so-called restaurant, Lux simply brought the two of them out of the restaurant. The magistrate building was still sealed. It seemed like it would not be able to be used again in a short period of time. The three of them went downstairs to the green belt. Although it was called a green belt, but other than the fact that it was slightly smaller, it looked no different from a tropical rainforest. If it was a normal person, they would probably find it difficult to move around. But Su Shenxing's group was not a normal person in the true sense. Therefore, even if they were in a tropical rainforest, they could still continue to talk and laugh. After finding a relatively flat ground, Lux took out his gun and reconstructed the data to show a lot of food from Earth. Speaking of which, why didn't you use this ability earlier? Su Shenxing was very dissatisfied with this and complained, "You want to go to that strange restaurant again, I suspect you want to make up the word count." Because the gun has a quota for the information distribution, Lux replied innocently. If I exceed the quota, my rating will drop and my salary will decrease. I should save as much as I can. Your Space Administration is a universal superclass. Organization. How can you be so stingy? Su Shenxing could not help but be surprised. Even the landlord doesn't have any extra food. Lux spread out his hands and had a helpless expression. Is that really the case? Su Shenxing narrowed his eyes and asked suspiciously. Okay, it's just a joke. After all, a large amount of information appearing out of thin air in a world will also cause the entropy of the universe itself to suddenly increase. When this situation intensifies to a certain extent, it will cause the destruction of the universe. Therefore, the information distribution quota for the executive officer's gun is also for this reason. Lux explained leisurely. Although it's just a joke, it is said that the reason for the control of the gun quota is because of the lack of budget. Although I only heard it from hearsay. Also, if you don't eat, the food will be eaten by Emoli. After listening to his explanation, well, Su Shinching still did not understand what was going on, but in his understanding, it was probably the same as him. In order to prevent his actions from inadvertently destroying the world, it was like insurance. After lunch, the magistrate building was still not in use. There was even a floating translucent screen outside the building, telling the public that the building needed a large-scale overhaul and could only be reopened tomorrow or even the day after tomorrow. This made Su Shenxing very unhappy. He came here with the intention of playing for a day, but in the end, he was forced to sleep outside. This was not part of his plan. Isn't this Lux? At this time, a deep male voice came from beside them. Su Shenxing turned his head and saw that the person who came was about 3 meters tall, wearing a cloak. He had a stubble on his face and looked like he was dispirited and unmotivated. Officer Roland. When Lux saw the other person, he did a reflexive action. Su Shenxing thought that it was an action similar to a salute. At the same time, he also noticed that Lux's body was tense, as if he was nervous. You came at the right time. The other person patted Lux's head with his broad palm. Under the other person's palm, Lux's head was as small as a tangerine. I'm just about to arm myself and ask for my salary. Ah no, it's to attend the end-of-year presentation. I remember that you're quite skilled. If you're free, come with me. We can't let our space administration lose face. Arm yourself and ask for your salary? Su Shenxing muttered curiously. It's the end-of-year presentation. The dispirited man immediately corrected him in a dignified manner. Then he looked at Su Shenxing. Who are you? Lux's friend. Lux was about to introduce Su Shenxing, but the other person laughed loudly. Forget it, that's not important. I want to ask you, little brother, how are your skills? Su Shenxing was also confused by the other person's bold and unruly appearance. He did not know whether to call him thick-skinned or unruly, but he just replied subconsciously, not bad. Then there's no problem. Come with us to attend the end-of-year presentation. I was worried that I would be the only representative of the Space Administration this time. I might not be able to beat those old guys. The dispirited man was suddenly overjoyed. He did not even ask for Su Shenxing's opinion. He just grabbed him by the neck and very unyieldingly led him in the direction of the portal. Su Shenxing thought for a moment and felt that it was quite interesting, so he decided to follow them and take a look. He gestured slightly to Emoli, and the little girl understood and ran over with small, quick steps. The 3-meter-tall man also noticed the little Emoli, and asked Su Shenxing with some hesitation, this little girl's skills. Why do you only care about her skills? That's why your end-of-year presentation is so dangerous. While Su Shenxing was complaining in his heart, he looked around and then pointed at a person not far away whose hair stood up like a hedgehog and whose whole body was emitting golden fighting spirit. Like that, she can take on 10 of them. Oh, that's great. The dispirited man did not have the slightest doubt about this. It was unknown whether it was an act or a sincere exclamation. Wait a moment. Lux, who was stunned for a long time, came back to his senses and quickly caught up with the crowd. He said to the dispirited man, Mr. Su is a person from another world and is not a member of the Space Administration. Is it really okay to just casually bring him to the end-of-year presentation? If I remember correctly, the end-of-year presentation will have a lot of important things to announce, right? Yes, just like you said, this little brother is from another world. So even if he knows about our Space Administration, who can he tell? Is he a native of that world? The dispirited man was very open-minded. Moreover, the things announced at the end-of-year presentation will be announced to the public sooner or later. The real confidential matters are still decided by other seminars. Lux, this is also your first time attending the end-of-year presentation of the Space Administration, right? Because in the past years, I was always on a mission. Or rather basically, there would not be a steward attending this kind of conference. That's right. Just treat it as if you were tricked by me and attend this once. How about it? The dispirited man yawned and finally let go of Su Shenxing's neck. He took the lead and walked in front of Su Shenxing. At this time, Su Shenxing finally had the opportunity to ask Lux, what kind of event is the end-of-year presentation? Simply put, it is to announce the results of this year and make a forecast for next year. With these two as the basis, we will strive for a budget for next year. Lux replied with a bitter smile. Loot distribution meeting. But then again, he did not expect this seemingly detached space administration to have such a thing as a budget. He suddenly felt a sense of familiarity. This end-of-year presentation. Loot distribution meeting. Is there anything worth paying attention to? You were obviously right just now. Why did you change it to such an obvious term of malice? Lux first complained, then explained to Su Shenxing, in the mid-Serta civilization, other than the Space Administration, there are actually 3 other organizations of the same level. They are the Magic Science Research Society, the Ether Order, and the Dimensional Garrison. The Magic Science Research Society, as the name suggests, is a research organization that classifies magic and science from different worlds and uses it as a basis to develop new equipment. Our guns, executive ships, and semi-high-dimensional platforms are all their masterpieces. The Ether Order is a mystical research department that focuses on faith, ether, and the void. The dimensional route is the track that they laid out to control the ether. In addition, they are also responsible for collecting and safekeeping some of the more dangerous foreign world heritage or information distortion products, such as the UK's that the 7th seat brought back. The Dimensional Garrison is the overall management department of the mid-Serta station troops in all the second-class worlds, sovereign worlds. Occasionally, they will also provide some help to our executive officers. At present, the Dimensional Garrison is almost the most powerful force in the multiverse. After a brief introduction to the competitors, Lux sighed deeply. I'm afraid it won't be that easy to snatch food from them. As they spoke, the 3 of them had already followed the uncle through the portal. When they walked out of the door, the scenery of the Judgment Planet, which was completely different from the skyscrapers, appeared in front of Su Shenxing. It was an incomparably magnificent and huge building. It was so huge that even if one looked at the planet from space, one would be able to notice it at once. It was as if a gorgeous flower had bloomed on the surface of the planet. Chapter 452. Even the experienced and knowledgeable Su Shenxing couldn't help but be amazed by the building at this time. So far, probably only the Great Demonic Realm, which connected the entire world and even turned the universe into a part of the building, could completely override this building. However, it was meaningless to compare the Great Demonic Realm. It was just like military fans who were debating whether a battleship in World War II had sneaked into a space battleship when it was at its most awesome. If one wanted to beat it up, it could indeed tie up all the remaining battleships together and beat them up. However, they were not on the same level at all. There was simply no comparison. All in all, if the Great Devil Realm was not mentioned, this huge, probably lotus-shaped building should be the most majestic building Su Shenxing had ever seen. Even the Death Star Fortress in Centaurus was only made of asteroids. In terms of size, it was probably not comparable to this giant lotus building. Almost everyone would be amazed when they saw this building. The reason why he used the prefix, almost, was because when Emily looked at the giant lotus, she didn't look shocked at all. Instead, she drooled. Su Shenxing didn't need to establish a spiritual link with her to guess what this girl was thinking. Such a big lotus. How big are the lotus seeds? Mr. Landlord, I want to eat lotus roots. Well, it seems that I guessed wrong, but it's almost the same meaning. Su Shenxing glanced around and found that there were many people around, probably because of the end-of-year statement. So he pretended to be righteous and scolded. Don't mess around. This kind of thing has to wait until there are fewer people. Well, if this thing has lotus roots. Although Lux had crammed his knowledge about Earth before he went to find Su Shenxing, and he was more or less familiar with Earth, there were obviously many things that couldn't be learned through tutoring. For example, this time he couldn't figure out what a lotus root was. In the end, he could only turn a blind eye to the whispering of Su Shenxing and Mo Li. When his eyes could move away from the amazing giant lotus building, Su Shenxing found that they were not on the planet where the giant lotus building was located. They should be in the space station of that planet, so they could see the tip of the iceberg of the giant lotus building. If they were on that planet, they would probably think that the petals of the giant lotus were mountains or something. However, the artificial gravity system of the space station was very good, so Su Shenxing didn't notice it for a while. But he was able to notice it immediately because of the gravity. The planet where the giant lotus building was located was obviously a supergiant planet. The Death Star Fortress in Centaurus was not even a baby in front of it, and in theory, this supergiant planet should have much stronger gravity than Earth, unless it was made of very light gas. After Su Shenxing told Lux his speculation, Lux smiled and said, I know what you're talking about, the law of gravity in your world, right? But unfortunately, although there are many similarities between the laws of different worlds, they are not universal. Even if you really go to the planet below, You shouldn't feel too strong of a gravitational force. After a pause, he said with a strange look. In fact, only freaks like you can be self-consistent and adapt to almost all known worlds. When people from other worlds with incompatible laws come to Mid-Sirta, they have to wear special life support devices. Stop whispering over there. Get ready, we're going to the venue. The dispirited middle-aged man in front of them suddenly interrupted the conversation between the two and said in a clear voice. Speaking of which, how are we going to go down to the planet below? Su Xinxing pulled Emily, who was leaning against the glass and still drooling at the giant lotus building, to his side. If he left this girl alone, she would probably try to bite the glass. Then he asked curiously, is it a spaceship? Or a Wuling Hong? A shuttle? None of them. The middle-aged man shook his head and said, it's a chair. What? Su Xinxing looked at Lux with a confused look. The latter had not participated in the end-of-year presentation, so he was as confused as Su Xinxing. Looking at the two dumbfounded people, the uncle said meaningfully, wait and hope. No matter how Su Xinxing and the others asked, he didn't say anything. He just quickened his pace. Su Xinxing could only follow with a head full of question marks. Soon, Su Xinxing knew what the chair the middle-aged man was talking about was. That's right, what was displayed in what looked like an exit was not a spaceship or a shuttle, but rows of chairs. To be exact, it was a U-shaped sofa with a floating function. It looked like a sci-fi movie. But it still couldn't change the fact that it was just a chair. Yeah. By the way, the middle-aged man added with a smile, this chair doesn't have a seat belt. Just look at it and you'll know. Su Xinxing could only sigh at how strange the people in this world were. It was obvious that he wasn't the only one with this idea. Many people who also landed in this space station had a strange expression. Of course, maybe their race's face had a strange color. After copying the middle-aged man, Su Xinxing casually chose a chair and sat down. He thought for a bit and finally pulled Emily to his sofa. Just as Su Xinxing and the other rookie participants were staring at the huge airtight door not far away, a strange sense of weightlessness suddenly came from the chair. In the next moment, everyone discovered that they were already in midair. F***CKF**CKF**CKF**CK. That airtight door was just for show, the real door was actually the floor. Unlike the other rookies who panicked because of the sudden situation, Su Xinxing still had the leisure to think about random things. He could even vaguely hear the middle-aged man muttering in his chair outside of the whistling wind. I experienced it before, you guys should also have a taste. Well, this is an experience for rookies. Definitely not my bad taste. He didn't know if this planet was strange, or if the laws of this world were different from Earth, or if the sofa under him had a special effect. Even though they were still in space, there was no problem with breathing at this height. Even without a seatbelt, the chair didn't show any signs of weightlessness. Instead, it seemed like there was an unknown force that could attract people and prevent them from being thrown out. In short, after the initial shock, Su Xinxing had completely calmed down. Logically speaking, this speed wasn't even as fast as when he was blasted into a star. Therefore, while the surrounding sofas continued to emit screams that were more exciting than skydiving and bungee jumping, Su Xinxing's side was surprisingly quiet and even a bit bored. Landlord, I want to eat glutinous rice and lotus root slices. Don't mess around, where would I find that much glutinous rice? Thanks to this rapid descent, the people in the space station soon began to approach the ground. Just as Su Xinxing thought they would enter the giant lotus-shaped building, the ground slowly opened a gate. We're actually going underground? Even Lux couldn't help but complain. By the way, not counting Su Xinxing and the middle-aged man who were veterans, Lux was one of the first people to get used to parachuting. After all, he was a member of the rocket team that had traveled across the universe. What kind of storms had he not seen? He had even participated in the crusade against the ancient four-element giant whale that had an eye the size of a planet. Even though he didn't do much other than hiding on the ship and shouting 666, the most important thing was to participate. That's why you guys are still too young. At this time, the middle-aged man's chair came closer and he said mysteriously, next is the main event. As soon as Su Xinxing heard this black-bellied guy talking to himself, he had already categorized him as an untrustworthy person. But Su Xinxing was indeed a bit curious. The giant lotus building was clearly there, so why didn't they use it and instead went underground for a meeting? Could it be that they were planning to open it in the lotus route? Regarding this, Su Xinxing couldn't help but be a bit worried. What if Emily ate the entire lotus root halfway through the meeting? Behind the gate on the ground was a dark tunnel. Although the chair could automatically float forward, it was hard to tell how deep they had dived into the ground. Only the occasional flashing lights and the luminous paint on the ground let people know that they didn't go the wrong way and floated to another place. After a few more minutes, they finally flew out of the tunnel. Suddenly, their field of vision became clear. Okay, I know it's a bit tacky to use the word shocked, as if you were fired from UC News. But at this time, Su Shenxing felt that other than shock, there weren't many words that could express the surprise in his heart. The place they were now in was like the inside of a giant egg, on a small platform at the edge. The star core. No, from the visible size it might have exceeded the size of a star core. It seems that the planet itself doesn't even have a mantle layer, only a surface layer. The reason why I used this kind of speculation was because something blocked Su Shenxing's vision. It was like a deformed baby, curled up inside this huge egg. The only place where it was connected to the outer eggshell was its head. This made people feel like the life was being pulled by the hair, which was indescribably funny. However, not many people would be able to laugh. This was a cosmic creature that could easily threaten a planet. In any movie on Earth, it was undoubtedly the final boss. Su Shenxing could feel that the other party was not a fierce creature, but for a creature of the same size, the other party's terrifying body size was the biggest threat. Even if it was an unconscious movement or even breathing, it could cause a destructive blow to a creature of the same size. In terms of scale, humans might not even be at the level of mites for this huge creature, right? Let me introduce you. The decadent uncle seemed to be very satisfied with the stunned expressions of Su Shenxing and the others. He said, the leader, the highest level of the datum point world, and one of the few pure-blood mid-Serta people left. You must be kidding. Lux swallowed his saliva. The one who created the Space Administration is actually a monster race of this level? It is precisely because of the inconvenience of the mid-Serta's body size that the deacons of the Space Administration are mainly people from other worlds. The decadent uncle explained. Su Shenxing thought about it and felt that it was true. A creature of this level, if it traveled through time and space to other worlds, as long as it was a normal-sized civilization, it would probably think that it was a monster attacking them. Although there was a guarantee of combat power, it would be very troublesome to use it for negotiations or to carry out some secret missions. Therefore, the Space Administration was formed by small people. There was nothing unexpected about it. At this time, Su Shenxing suddenly remembered. The giant lotus outside. Could it be? It's the leader's hair. Su Shenxing was speechless. Only Jasmine muttered softly as she looked at the humanoid creature. There are no more lotus roots to eat. She lowered her head and looked very disappointed. Say it. Okay, young people. Yes, and you little girl. The decadent uncle looked up and then seemed to be a little motivated. Cheer up, our first opponents will be here soon. Su Shenxing heard him and looked up. He saw that on the other side of the platform, there were chairs that were not the same as the sofas that Su Shenxing and the others were sitting on. They looked more luxurious, or rather, more impressive. The people sitting on those chairs were all wearing long white robes with hoods covering their faces. The leader's robe was more luxurious than the others. Not only was it woven with gold thread, in fact, it was another kind of metal, but Su Shenxing did not understand this. Even the edges of the robe were covered with silver cloth. They are? Su Shenxing asked the decadent uncle. They are the representatives of chaos, who explore the mysteries of the multidimensional world. They are mainly based on the power of the soul and ether. Every time they ask for the budget, they ask for an exorbitant price, and they always try to squeeze the ether order out of our space administration. As the uncle spoke, his words were mixed with strong personal feelings. In short, they are not good people. Remember to stay away from them. But just as he finished speaking, the leader of the ether order stood up from his chair and slowly walked towards them. Chapter 453. Seeing Roland walking towards him, the dispirited uncle's eyes suddenly sharpened. He also stood up and greeted him. Long time no see, Sammy Alfredo. He raised the corner of his mouth and showed a mocking smile. Are you going to preach your mystical doctrine again? Su Shenxing felt that the Alfredo should be beautified by his translation, because when the uncle called the hood's name, it sounded like he was spitting bubbles. Get out of my way, Roland. I have no interest in looking at your stupid face that even the ether would vomit. The other party did not hesitate to spit back. But to Su Shenxing's surprise, although the other party's voice was a little hoarse, it was not a male's voice. Of course, it was not necessarily a female's voice. Not long ago, Lux showed Su Shenxing a group of otherworlders with more than 20 genders, which made Su Shenxing very curious about how messy it would be when the White Album came out every year. He carefully looked at the other party. Obviously, the robe and hood of this guy named Sammy were enchanted with some kind of spell, so that even the places that the hood could not cover would be shrouded in a layer of mist, blurring and difficult to identify. But the spell had no effect on Su Shenxing. On the contrary, the hood still faithfully performed its function, covering most of the other party's face, so that Su Shenxing could only see the other party's smooth chin and red lips. Suddenly, he felt that the other party was either a girl or a gay guy. Of course, it was not impossible that the other party was a hermaphrodite like Lux. So the Space Administration did not seem to promote cross-world love. Reproductive isolation aside, even the reproductive function was not the same. Just like flowers in a strict sense also belong to the sexual organs of plants, but humans could not really touch flowers. As for the boat and the gun, well, as long as you're happy. If you're not here for me, then your target is Lux or this little brother. The dispirited middle-aged man shook his head and clicked his tongue provocatively. TSK. TSK. Unfortunately, even so, it's useless. Our space administration is based on science and magic is secondary. Your occult studies are completely negligible to us. In fact, most of the Archons did not feel much about the Ether Order. And in the Archons training institutions, except for the relatively important Ether Order studies, almost all subjects related to the Ether Order were not compulsory courses. The man in the hood ignored the dispirited uncle and went straight to Su Shenxing. I feel the guidance of the Ether. The man said slowly to Su Shenxing and Emily, you two are the most talented youths I've ever seen. Even the Ether, which has always treated everyone equally, seems restless around you. Do you want to go with me into the realm to learn the mysteries of the world and Ether? The man interrupted Su Shenxing as soon as he said the word, I. If you're willing to give up your position in the Space Administration and come to the Ether Order, I can make an exception to recommend you to the leader, and His Holiness the Pope. You can skip the stages of being an Ether priest, a psychic priest, and a broken wall bishop, and directly become an archbishop of the spiritual realm. In terms of position, you're even higher than that stupid guy. I refuse. But Su Shenxing still refused the man without hesitation. The trivial matters on Earth were enough for him, and he didn't want to find himself a job. Especially when they couldn't even earn a single cent from this kind of work. Although Emily did not say anything, she did not notice the hood at all and just snuggled up to Su Shenxing. According to Su Shenxing's understanding of her, the reason why this girl was so obedient was mostly because she was so depressed that she did not even want to move because there was no lotus root to eat. Her actions clearly showed that the girl was on Su Shenxing's side. Don't refuse so quickly, you can think about it. I still have the patience to wait for your answer. The hooded man did not become angry because of this. After ignoring the dispirited uncle who was laughing or mocking, on the side, the hooded man named Sammy flung his robe and walked back to his seat unhurriedly. When he left, he threw out a sentence. Maybe you'll change your mind soon. After watching the hooded man leave, Su Shenxing turned his head and asked Lux, who had been watching the whole show, what did that guy mean? I don't know. Lux also shook his head. The Ether Order itself is a very mysterious existence in Mid-Serta. Although it is known by the people, the research it has conducted is a mystery. It is said that the spread of information will cause the disappearance of the uniqueness of the mysterious research, and the loss of the mystery, so the information was sealed. After a pause, he seemed to organize his thoughts a little, and then continued. But there is no doubt that the Ether Order's influence in Mid-Serta and the surrounding second-class worlds, sovereign worlds, is still very large, and their positions are also very high. After all, the Ether route that has almost changed the structure of the Space Administration and greatly increased the number of worlds that can be explored is the result of their research. Don't worry, they're probably just bluffing. The dispirited uncle did not seem to be worried at all. He snorted coldly. Apart from the Ether route, the Ether Order has almost nothing to contribute. But every year, they get a large budget, which is basically a waste of money. If this money can be invested in the Space Administration, we can definitely expand the team of Archons and explore the depths of the multiverse. So that's the case, it seems like it's still a matter of money. Su Shenxing understood. Speaking of which, Mr. Su, why did you refuse the other party's invitation without hesitation? Lux asked curiously. Nonsense, the money I earn here can't be used on Earth. Su Shenxing straightforwardly revealed his true nature of being a money grubber. But we provide currency exchange here, right? Lux looked surprised. Although the stock of currency on Earth is not much, it shouldn't be a problem for you if you don't intend to exchange a large amount of money. Simply put, it was impossible for a poor man like Su Shenxing to exchange all the currencies. What? Su Shenxing was also shocked. Why didn't you say so earlier? Then he began to be in a dilemma. How about I go over and surrender now? What do you think? Then are you going to borrow my head next? The dispirited uncle said with a straight face. It seemed that this dispirited uncle also knew some of Earth's illusions. This made Su Shenxing curious. After all, according to Lux, Earth was only a fourth-type world, unconfirmed world. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be on the Space Administration's investigation list. As a member of the Space Administration, it was strange for him to know about Earth's illusions. Can I borrow your head? Su Shenxing's face was full of surprise. He didn't intend to delve too deeply into the situation. Originally, he and Mo Li only planned to come here for a day trip, and didn't want to get involved in strange and troublesome matters. Nonsense, of course not. Hurry up and sit down. In a while, the end-of-year presentation will begin. The dispirited uncle glared at him, but of course, he couldn't pierce through Su Shenxing's face. After a short while, a group of people filed out of the tunnel, causing the entire grandstand to become slightly more crowded. Do you see the fat man leading the way? He's one of the people in charge of the dimensional garrison. He's in charge of the Mid-Suda world's internal defense. On the way, the uncle introduced the people who filed in to Su Shenxing. This time, his target was a man with a big belly. Although it can't be said that he's doing nothing, it's indeed not strict enough. Because this is a relatively inner world, right? With other worlds around, it's understandable that the local defense is a little lax. Lux also explained to Su Shenxing. They didn't know if he had vaguely heard Su Shenxing and the others talking about him, but the pot-bellied man only glanced at them. His small triangular eyes were full of cunning and contempt. After that, the other party didn't come looking for trouble like ordinary villains. He didn't come looking for trouble and just ignored them. Since there's still some time left, I might as well tell you the rules of the armed robbery. The dispirited uncle tried his best to cheer up and teach the students. Now they don't even bother to cover it up. In fact, the so-called end-of-year statement meeting was not as high-end as Su Shenxing had imagined. The entire rhythm and process was basically the various departments taking turns to go on stage and then start bragging. The more they bragged about themselves, the higher their points in the hearts of the leaders, and the more budget they might get later. However, there was a problem with this, and that was to reduce the opponent's points. While the opponent was bragging, the others would also ask some questions. It was easy to imagine that these questions were basically of the sharp and harsh type. When the speaker was forced into a corner, it was very easy for them to roll up their sleeves and beat someone up. Some people's fighting skills weren't that good, and they would accidentally beat up innocent people. Some energy creatures would even directly blow up many people and bring disaster to many people. In the end, more and more people participated in the chaos. Until now, the current situation was actually born. The concept of every year's presentation as a battle was accepted by everyone and became an official event. In fact, other than Su Shenxing and the others in the Space Administration, it wasn't like the dispirited uncle said that there was no one else. Although there were fewer people compared to the other two departments, there were still many people in the Space Administration. However, from the translucent screen on the badge, it seemed that Lux was the only administrator. The others were either logistics or engineers. Obviously, these technical jobs were only auxiliary and couldn't be used as gankers. Therefore, foreign aid like Su Shenxing was valuable. Although the dispirited uncle who invited Su Shenxing over probably didn't realize that he was sitting next to a pair of peerless monsters. It's starting. Following the uncle's low voice, the end-of-year presentation finally started as normal. The curtains were pulled open when the leader slowly opened his eyes. The scene was a bit frightening, but Su Shenxing was quite interested. After all, he had never seen such a creature before. The big egg. The light source in this huge space came from the light spots on the wall that looked like wall lamps. At that moment, all the light spots were like fireflies. They suddenly flapped their wings, although they didn't have wings, and formed a dazzling galaxy in front of everyone. Then, a thin and tall man appeared in the Milky Way. Because of the distance, the other party didn't look very tall, especially with the leader behind him as a comparison. But if one looked closely, they would find that the other party was more than 5 meters long, and the length of his arms was even more terrifying. He was wearing a red suit with a black belt and a white shirt underneath. There was also a small and comical cylindrical hat on his head. He wore a pure white mask on his face. There weren't even any eye holes. It was as if he didn't have a face. Do you still invite a host for your end-of-year presentation? Su Shenxing asked with interest. What host? The dispirited uncle asked in confusion. Is that the guy dancing in the light spots? Su Shenxing pointed to the tall and thin guy. But the dispirited uncle widened his eyes and looked over, but he couldn't find the person that Su Shenxing was talking about. This suddenly made Su Shenxing feel that something was wrong. So he asked Lux next to him, but he found that Lux also couldn't see the man. Just when Su Shenxing was hesitating whether to arrest the other party, Emily, who was leaning on Su Shenxing with a boring life expression, suddenly opened his eyes. Mr. Landlord, are they going to set off fireworks? Fireworks! Before Su Shenxing's voice fell, there were suddenly many powerful explosions on the leader. Several of them were even more destructive than a nuclear explosion, so much so that the platform far away was directly hit by the storm. Several people who didn't react in time were directly blown off their chairs and fell into the bottomless abyss. After the storm caused by the explosion, what appeared in front of everyone was an even worse scene. The leader, whose body size was close to the size of Earth, had become a floating piece of meat in the explosion just now. The gigantic head was quietly floating in the air. From its lower jaw, its entire body had disappeared. Only its terrifying giant eyes were still staring at the people on the platform. It was as if it was silently interrogating them, causing everyone's heart to sink to the bottom of the valley. Chapter 454. Clap, clap. The sudden applause brought everyone back to their senses. Everyone's gaze was focused on one spot, except for Su Shenxing and Emily. Before the other party clapped to attract attention, Su Shenxing had already looked over there. Emily, on the other hand, didn't seem to be interested in all this. He just stared at the remains of the leader that had been blown up and muttered, "The lotus root is gone." Dear guests. Hello everyone. The man in the red suit said with a voice that was sharp enough to give people goosebumps. There was a stiff and fake smile on his face, as if he was wearing a mask. It was obvious that the effect of not being able to see him except for Su Shenxing had disappeared. At this moment, he was standing on a piece of the leader's shattered flesh, staring at the platform where Su Shenxing and the others were. What did you do, you bastard? The president of the Magic Science Research Society, an old man with a goatee, who was the last to arrive, scolded loudly. Don't worry, I was just about to tell you slowly. It's not good to interrupt. The man in the suit raised his hand and made a zipping motion in front of him. The old man could only cover his mouth and make muffled sounds. A few people who looked like followers behind the old man immediately supported the old man, who almost fell to the ground and glared at the man in the suit. But the latter obviously didn't care. He just said happily, "If I let you continue to be confused like this, there will definitely be people who will jump out and say something that will give me a headache. So I'll explain the current situation to you. In short, we launched a rebellion in Mid-Serta and are preparing to overthrow the rule of the Mid-Serta people." Yes, that's it. You lunatic. The pot-bellied dimensional garrison commander wasn't intimidated by the other party. Instead, he snorted coldly. Our dimensional garrison won't allow such a situation to happen. Overestimating yourselves will only result in you being easily suppressed. That's not necessarily true, Sir General. The man in the suit said cheerfully. The fat general seemed to want to refute something, but before he could say anything, after an undetectable sound, he fell to the ground with a face full of disbelief. On the back of his head, purple blood was flowing out of a finger-sized bloody hole. And from the beginning, the person who stood beside the fat general like a secretary expressionlessly put away a weapon that looked like a pistol into his arms under the shocked gazes of the surrounding people. See what I said? The man in the suit's fake smile became even colder. He spread his hands. When did you think that we would only stupidly use war to kill the Mid-Serta people and seize power? Even the old man from the Magic Science Research Society was shocked by this scene and forgot to continue whimpering.
The meaning of the man in the suit was very clear.
It was likely that their organization had already begun to infiltrate the 4 major organizations of Mid-Sirta a long time ago. Now, it was difficult to determine how many spies there were in the 4 major organizations. The only thing that was certain was that Mid-Sirta was in a very dangerous situation. Speaking of which, you're quite calm, High Priest Sammy Alfredo. Then, the man in the suit turned his gaze to the next leader of the 4 major organizations. It's as if you already knew something. The ether will give us enlightenment. But unfortunately, you're obviously not someone who believes in the mysteries and the ether, so you didn't receive any enlightenment from it.
There was clearly someone being killed in front of him, but from the tone of the hooded man's voice, there was no fear. Instead, there was a hint of mockery. The ether tells us that there will be a huge and unavoidable calamity. I'm afraid that Mid-Sirta's current ability won't be able to deal with your sudden attack, and will eventually fall one by one.
It should have been like this, but you chose to make your move today. What do you mean by that? The man in the suit's expression didn't change at all, but his tone obviously became unhappy.
At the same time, the man who killed the fat general also cast his dangerous gaze on the hooded man, and the hand that didn't take it out from his pocket once again clenched the handle of his weapon.
I had thought that the future was already decided, that the ether would guide the future. But that was not the case.
Today, there was an anomaly, that even the ether rejoiced and changed the course of its activities, which was why the future slipped into an unknown direction once more, the hooded man said slowly without a trace of fear.
Oh, the ether. Then did your ether tell you that today is the day you die?
The man in the suit suddenly sneered, and then the place where the hooded man was suddenly exploded. Although the power of the explosion wasn't even 1/10,000th of the explosion that killed the leader, it was obvious that the circumstances of these 2 explosions were very similar, and they were essentially the same kind of explosion. In addition, the feeling of the explosion at close range was obviously stronger than the big explosion at a distance.
Many of the women present, or gender characteristics that were more feminine, screamed. Cracks also appeared on the platform because of the impact of the explosion.
As for the center of the explosion, where the hooded man was originally, it had turned into a hole, and from there, one could see a bottomless abyss.
Then the next one is Mr. Roland. The man in the suit originally wanted to continue using the annoying tone just now to finish off Roland. But when he saw the situation at the Space Administration, he couldn't help but exclaim. The man who had long lost his decadence naturally didn't say anything.
The key was that in front of Roland, Su Shenqing stood there with a helpless expression, and in his hand was the hooded man that should have disappeared in the explosion just now.
Originally, I just came to see what the armed men were like, but I didn't expect to be involved in such a strange incident. Su Shenqing threw the hooded man in his hand, and Roland immediately caught him. Then as a reward for treating me to lunch, I'll help a little this time. After doing all this, Su Shenqing patted the dust off his body and looked at the man in the suit. At this time, the words on the virtual screen next to him changed. Suspect X is on trial, Savior X suppresses the rebellion, but Su Shenqing didn't notice this, and just said softly,
Emily, let's go.
Wah. Chapter 455.
As someone who participated in the rebellion and dared to assassinate the leader, and subdue the upper echelons of the 4 departments, Labril was quite confident in himself. This confidence did not come from his weapon or anything else, but from his own strength. Before joining the organization, he was a peak champion in a fantasy world. He was an orphan born on the battlefield, eating corpses and drinking blood as he grew up. Everything he had seen and learned was about killing. He himself was born for killing. Almost everyone who provoked him had their entire family slaughtered. He was not filled with hostility, but was the embodiment of violence. He had once broken the original order of the world, causing all the old powers to return to chaos. He had also once fought against the so-called fate, and even killed those high and mighty gods who dared to order him around. In the end, he stood at the top of the world, thinking that he had already touched the limit. But that was not the end. Soon, he learned of the existence of the world barrier, from the notes left behind by the gods. Beyond this world, there must be other worlds. Those gods believed that only by transcending this world could one go to the true divine realm and become a true god. But it was not easy to reach that step. Even though there were no less than 1 trillion geniuses throughout history, there were only 3 who had truly taken that step. But Labril did it. After learning that there was a way to become stronger in this world, he devoted himself to training, and finally succeeded in taking that step, breaking through the void. It was a pity that, breaking through the void to reach the divine realm, was just a conjecture of the people of that world. After Labril broke through the world barrier with great difficulty, what welcomed him was the terrifying sea of ether, the twisted remains of laws, and the endless void that devoured all things. As a being born in the world of laws, once he came to the world gap, he would immediately lose the concept of living and die. Even a champion like Labril was the same. He could even see the corpses of the 3 mythical figures who had broken through the world barrier just like him, worshipped by the people of his world as true gods. According to the classification of the Space Administration, Labril's world was a Type 4 world, unconfirmed world. So under normal circumstances, no administrator would pass through there. However, perhaps Lablaya's fate wasn't to end yet. A member of a mysterious organization wandering between the world gaps discovered him and took him back. After understanding the truth of the world, Labril joined the organization and began to work for them. Although he almost died when he stepped into the void due to his lack of knowledge, that did not shake Labril's confidence. After all, even in the entire Mid-Surda, the number of people who could break through the world barrier with their physical bodies would definitely not exceed. Well, it would definitely not exceed 7 billion. Considering that Mid-Surda had more than 1,000 sovereign worlds, and the population base was a positive number, the median was 10 to the 40th power, and the upper number was 10 to the 2048th power, and the middle number was 10 to the 2048th power, and the middle number was taken here. Only 7 billion people could break through the void, and the probability was quite low. Moreover, in terms of combat strength alone, Lablier, who had fought his way out of the battlefield since he was a child, experienced countless fierce battles, and eventually became the strongest expert in his world, was also one of the best in the 7 billion miles. Originally, with the existence of a peerless monster like him, logically speaking, it should be an easy and simple task to deal with dozens or even hundreds of high-ranking members of the 4 major organizations with average combat strength. However, the reality was not so. At first, when he saw a human male with a subtle hairline charge out from the platform, he was slightly alarmed. However, he did not expect that the other party could not even fly, and after leaping over 10,000 meters, he fell straight down. Although he did not know that the other party was shouting, F***CK, where's Molly's double jump? What did that mean? However, Labril had already determined that the other party was not a threat to him. Even those on the platform who had a hopeful expression when they saw the other party leap out, once again showed a look of despair. It was supposed to be like that. However, while the other party was falling, he threw a punch in his direction. Danger! Labril's well-honed combat instincts were instantly stimulated. Almost in 1,000th of a second, he made a dodging action and teleported over 1,000 meters away. Even so, he still could not avoid the other party's fist wind. Of course, the fist wind here did not refer to the airflow caused by the other party's fist. Because Labril himself also had the superpower to control the air, if it was just wind, no matter how strong it would not be a threat to him. Instead, it was more like a pure energy impact. From the size of a fist to a radius of more than 10 kilometers, how powerful was this punch? Labril could not accurately describe it. He only knew that because of this punch, he was blasted over 6,300 kilometers away, and during the process, whether it was teleportation or other evasive abilities, he could not use them. He was blasted half to death, and in the end, he was embedded in the rock wall of the outer layer of the planet. However, the human male who threw the punch was also embedded in the rock wall because of the reaction force. In fact, because the human male was near the rock wall to a certain extent, he was worse off than Labril, and almost flew out of the planet. But soon, Labril realized that he had misjudged the situation again. Not only was the other party unscathed, but he was also shouting, "It's been a long time since someone could make me so miserable. I admit that you're a good opponent. Let me be a little more serious from now on." Or something like that. It seemed like his fighting spirit was even higher. Come on, I didn't even use a single move. You're the one who blasted yourself into the wall. Labril cussed in his heart. He turned his head and found that 12 of the 15 rings on his hand, the people of Labril world had 17 fingers, had shattered. His heart sank. This was the treasure that the organization had given him as a reward after he had completed many of their missions. Every ring could die for him once. In other words, he should have died 12 times during the time he was sent flying 6,300 kilometers away. But he was once a killing god, and a few setbacks could not bring him down. Even if the monster in front of him was not inferior to me, he still had a burning fighting spirit. Be serious?
Then let me see how strong you are.
Pushing all the power in his body to the maximum, Lablé gathered all his strength and blasted out a killing move that he had been practicing for hundreds of years at his opponent. Then, he was slapped back into the wall by the other party. Now, not only were the remaining 3 rings shattered, even Labril himself was heavily injured.
And the other party seemed to be even more excited because he did not die after receiving 2 punches. It would be worse if this continued. He didn't expect that his foolproof plan would go awry because of him. In order to carry out the rebellion, his organization had spent a long time waiting for such a rare opportunity. The top 10 executors of the Space Administration were basically carrying out missions. Even the 7th executor from 3,000 years ago, who had just returned, had to go to another world to collect some special materials to maintain the ship because it was too old. Many of the UKs sealed by the Ether Order had been stolen by the spies they had planted. Although many of their members had been sacrificed, they had successfully spread them to various parts of the world of Midchelda, causing even greater chaos and distortion of information. The latter, which was the extreme information distortion, was almost fatal to the Magic Science Research Society. All information weapons could not be used against information distortion, which was one of the biggest weaknesses of information technology. Only the former 7th executor of the UK could defeat and subdue the other UK. The only opponent of this rebellion, the Dimensional Garrison, was also in a weakened state due to the annual change of guard. If he could perfectly complete the mission, he would undoubtedly be able to seal the deal. He did not expect such a situation to happen. Labril knew that things were not good, but he could only think of 2 solutions. The first was to think of a way to escape. According to his past experience, as long as he could escape with his life from an enemy who was much stronger than him, he would soon have a fortuitous encounter that would allow his cultivation to soar to the point where he was only 1 level away from the enemy. Then, he could rely on his talent to kill the enemy. He did not intend to use this method at the moment. Labril was still confident that he could escape from the enemy. After all, he could fly. But if they were to shrink back, the success rate of this rebellion would be greatly reduced. Everything else aside, as long as this terrifyingly powerful monster went out to cause trouble, then there would be a huge flaw in their plan, and the 4 major organizations would be able to turn the tables. After all, this was Midchelda, the headquarters of the 4 major organizations, and the resources they had accumulated over countless years were not to be underestimated. A drop of water should be repaid with a spring. This was one of the few advantages of Labril. Although his body was about to be crippled, his spirit was still intact. In this way, the second method could still be implemented. When he was in that organization, he had also flipped through many books from other worlds and learned some unorthodox techniques. For example, possession. With such a powerful body, if he could seize it. With this thought in mind, Labril did not hesitate to use this trick on the human male who was charging at him. The trick of possession, to put it simply, was to forcibly invade another person's body with one's spirit and seize control of the body. Even if he could not completely seize control of the other person's body, he had learned how to erode the other person's spirit. As long as he eroded the other person's spirit bit by bit, the body would still be his in the end. With this thought in mind, he turned into a spiritual body and pounced at the human male. In the end, he only saw a fist growing bigger and bigger in his eyes. Ouch! Then, his spiritual body was sent flying by the human male's punch together with his physical body. After crashing through more than 280 kilometers of the surface, he directly flew out of the planet and plunged into the steel space station. Until now, he still could not figure out how the other person's fist could touch his spiritual body. But no matter how unwilling he was to believe it, this battle was his defeat, and it was a crushing defeat where he could not even fight back. If he still had the strength to escape just now, he probably did not even have the strength to stand up now. Moreover, the space station was not far from the planet. With the strength of that guy who could jump more than 6,000 kilometers in one leap, he would soon catch up to him here. At the very least, we have to inform about that guy. Labril struggled to catch his breath. He felt that his bones might have been embedded in his internal organs. Even his breath carried a bloody smell. How long had it been since he was in such a sorry state? A moment later, he threw a pendant on his wrist into the space through the hole he made. "Is it, boss?" Then, he spoke to the empty space. "What's wrong?" "Yes." Suddenly, a voice rang out in his mind. "There's a problem with the information." Cuff. I have someone whose strength may be close to the top 3 executors of the Space Administration.
You lost?
Yes. Yes, a crushing defeat.
I see.
You've worked hard. You're useless now.
Yes.
When Su Xinxing jumped into the space station, what he saw was a battered man in a suit vomiting blood. His eyes were full of shock and resentment. The next moment, he was like a balloon. His whole body swelled from the inside and his eyeballs popped out. Not only did it not look comical, but it also looked terrifying. Su Xinxing, who had been through a lot, was no stranger to this phenomenon. This was a F*King self-destruct. And from the other person's expression, it was the kind of human bomb that he did not even know he had this ability. Su Xinxing did not know how powerful a bomb was, but in this space, if he was blown away and could only float like a perfect creature, it would be terrible. So he decisively jumped back to the planet. Not long after he jumped, the entire space station was enveloped in flames. As Su Xinxing listened to the whooshing sounds of the rapid descent, he also saw the final scene of the space station. The space station exploded in space. The last smoke and embers spread outwards. Finally, from afar it formed a rose pattern. Su Xinxing thought about it and decided to first pull the face of Mo Li, who had been watching the show from the beginning. Chapter 456. Sovereign World, Nosviatofel, a planet at the edge of the universe. Since there was no sun and only a few small stars that acted as satellites as light sources, the planet, codenamed GN-0473 in the Space Administration's database, was covered in thick layers of ice all year round. Its ecological environment was so bad that only creatures like tardigrades could survive for a short period of time, which was why it did not develop its own ecosystem or intelligent life. Still, that did not mean that the planet was a desolate place. In fact, while most people in Nosviatofel might not know about the existence of the planet at the edge of the universe, the leaders of the United Government of the Universe valued the planet greatly. Even in the multiverse that the Space Administration had confirmed, the planet was one of the few that existed. There was a space-time fissure inside the planet. The fissure had penetrated the world barrier in an unimaginable way. Probably because it was close to the outer reaches of the world, its own laws were also skewed, making it both an entrance and an exit, allowing the flow of ether to flow out of the fissure even as it poured in. Moreover, the flow rate in both directions was very constant and would not affect the stability of the world's structure. Such unique natural conditions made the planet one of the few docks in Mid-Sirta that could repair and maintain the dimensional ships of the Archons. Thanks to that, the government of this world also received considerable preferential treatment from the Space Administration in terms of policy. At this moment, the ship of the 7th Executor Ing, who had been missing for more than 3,000 years, was being repaired in this shipyard. It was the ship of the 7th Executor Ing, who suddenly reappeared. Inside GN-0473, the mantle near the dimensional fissure had long been removed by construction machinery, and a rather huge building was built with the fissure as its foundation. And as time went on, the building gradually expanded. Today, GN-0473 was almost hollowed out. "How's the Violet?" In the bridge of the executive ship, Ing strode in and asked the technician who was doing maintenance on the Violet. "With the ether crystal you found, the repair process is very smooth." The anteater that looked like it had 6 arms and could stand on 2 legs replied to her as he wrote a maintenance report on his tablet. Because many parts of the Violet are models from 3,000 standard eras ago, many of the stock parts could not be used due to interface specification issues after so long, which is why we could only print them urgently using 3D printing technology. The only difficulty is the precious material that cannot be found in ordinary worlds, which is also the most crucial material for the ship, the crystallization of ether. You know that information reconstruction technology cannot construct the non-existent, overhead information ether. But since you can find the crystallization of ether itself, then there is no problem. "So when can the Violet set sail again?" the girl asked. "Well." The anteater scratched its long face with one of its free hands, and then said uncertainly, "In theory, all basic functions have been completed. You can set sail now, but many auxiliary functions have not been installed, and according to the relevant regulations of Mid-Sirta, repaired and maintained spaceships must be troubleshooted by professionals before they can set sail. If everything goes well, you can depart in about 3 days." "Is that so?" "Well, thank you. You can go now. I want to be alone for a while." "Very well, have a good day." The anteater gave the girl a Machelda military salute, but because it had 4 more arms, the action looked a little funny. After that, the anteater left the bridge. Violet, are you there? The AI is online. Online completed. I am happy to continue to serve you, my lady. Is there any record of dreaming in your database? Searching. Dreaming is a chaotic memory/knowledge playback formed by some intelligent creatures based on their own subconscious. A considerable part of it is because their thinking organs have fallen into a temporary dormant state. In order to prevent themselves from being unable to be restarted, they run simulations in the dormant state. But your soul and body structure are different from most of the known intelligent creatures. If we include your strength as a variable and search again, we can get different results. In some of the worlds with supernatural powers, humans with supernatural powers can foresee the future to a certain extent through training or because of their talent. This situation is manifested in the state of dreams, also known as precognitive dreams. In addition, there are also special situations such as telepathy and shared dreams. I'm sorry, due to limited information, there is no way to obtain the knowledge you want. If you really need, I can access the database of the Space Administration for you, and research all the information below your confidentiality level. No, this is enough. Ing exhaled softly. Since this morning, she vaguely felt that something was wrong. It was a strange and ominous dream that made her unable to eat or sleep well. Although she basically couldn't remember what she saw in the dream, it was still difficult for her to let it go. As the cancer of the UK-002 world, which could easily destroy a world, Ing knew very well that even if it was a small thing, it could become a big thing if it happened to her. There must be something that she didn't know about, and it happened in some corner. And this matter should also have something to do with her. Could it be that some of the biotype UKs I collected escaped from the Ether Order? After thinking about it, it seemed that this was the only explanation. After a while, the girl made a decision. Violet, prepare to set sail. But the command tower has no requirement to set sail. As the 7th executor of the Space Administration, I order you to prepare to set sail. Your order has been received. Starting the engine. Warning. Foreign objects are found everywhere in the ship. Is it the maintenance staff who are still on the ship? Ing couldn't help but have a headache. Ensure their safety. Throw them out of the Violet. In addition, several portable neutron bombs were also found. What? The girl was shocked at first, but then she immediately reacted. Her intuition was right. It seemed that someone was really up to something. Her face suddenly became serious. Disable the fuses of those bombs. There's no time to care about these small fries. Go directly to Mid-Serta. Understood. Chapter 457. The neighboring worlds of the Mid-Serta world had almost become its vassals due to the existence of the Space Administration, which was the so-called first-type world. However, the uncertain word, almost, was used because there were exceptions. Although it was an exception, it could only be considered as an ambiguous situation. On one side of the Mid-Serta world, there was an empty gap. The sea of ether in this gap was far more turbulent than the other gaps in other worlds, so much so that even Mid-Serta's long-matured spaceship technology could not guarantee that it could be navigated in it. Coupled with the Magic Science Research Society's research on the information sent back by the dimensional probes, they had almost confirmed that there was a dark zone in that gap. As for the reason for the formation of this zone, there were still different opinions in the Mid-Serta Spacetime Academy. Some scholars believed that it was just a natural phenomenon, just like how most planets would have strange weather due to different climates. It was a normal situation, and there was no value in studying it. Some scholars believe that it was the remains of the world after it was destroyed by some external force, and the observed situation was just the aftermath of the world's destruction. Some scholars believe that it was the chaos described in many world myths, and when it reached a certain limit, it would explode and form a new universe. Some scholars believe that it was actually the egg of a void creature, and it was hatching. The only thing that could be confirmed was that the dark zone was difficult to navigate, and it was extremely dangerous. There was almost nothing in it, so there was no value in developing it. Considering the danger, Mid-Serta had listed it as a no-navigation zone 1,000 years ago, and all civilian and commercial spaceships were prohibited from entering that area. However, if someone went to that area now, they would find that it was a completely different scene from the desolate and terrible situation in the past. Countless spaceships with completely different styles from Mid-Serta were quietly parked in that violent sea of ether. All of Midsurda's radars and detectors could not detect them. And even the information beams used for communication could not capture them. They were just like a group of cold corpses. However, although the technology tree was not the same, in fact, these spaceships could communicate with each other. There was a flaw in the plan. The fourth part of the first phase of the plan, codenamed Operation Decapitation, had an abnormal situation. Agent Lablé has died in the line of duty. A spaceship that looked like a megaphone magnified tens of thousands of times sent the latest information to the flagship in the middle of the fleet. The flagship's main control computer projected the information to the personal computer of the flagship's highest commander. Unlike the computers on Earth, the computers in the civilization had been implanted into the body of the individual, and the information that one wanted to know would be directly transmitted to the highly mechanized brain through nerve signals and stored in the corresponding region. However, the commander-in-chief of this flagship was obviously a nostalgic person. He still chose to project the text on his retina. "You couldn't kill the leader?" His brows furrowed slightly. He wasn't too happy about the sudden bad news. According to the message sent by Agent Lablé before his death, as well as the situation detected by the detection devices our army has scattered in Midsurda, the life activity of the leader has completely stopped. Then what happened? When Agent Lablé planned to recruit the upper echelons of the four major organizations and eliminate the candidates who did not cooperate, an accident occurred. An existence at the level of a seat intervened in the battle and defeated Agent Lablé. That Lablé. I remember that he also came from a barbaric world. He was defeated so easily. According to the classification of agents, Agent Lablé is an S-rank agent. Therefore, it is determined that the enemy's rank is not lower than the top 10 seats. It is recommended that an SSS rank agent be dispatched to eliminate him. That's too slow. Moreover, if the enemy is also an SSS rank, this move is not safe. Although I don't like those bastards in Midsurda, I have to say that their tens of thousands of years of accumulation are still very scary. It's not surprising that there are one or two SSS rank agents that we don't know about. He took a deep breath, and his expression did not change at all. Both the Emperor and I are mentally prepared to face all kinds of accidents. Rather, it would be unbelievable if our rebellion plan could succeed so easily. Understood. Then how should we deal with this unexpected situation? Mobilize the 12 apocalypses and erase that planet along with that universe from the world of Midsurda. Warning. Are you sure you want to remove the restrictions of the apocalypses and bombard Midsurda? As one of the most powerful weapons on the ship, there was no doubt about the power of the apocalypses. In fact, using the word power to describe it was a bit inappropriate. The original name of the apocalypses was Law Destroyer. Because its operating principle was to take the laws of the world and delete the chosen object from its source, it was also called Deletion Cannon. Its destructive power was even greater than some causal weapons. With enough energy, it could completely delete an entire world, leaving behind only the origin of the world. Of course, if he wanted to delete a world, the shipboard apocalypse wouldn't be able to do so. He would need to rely on other worlds and build a specialized world-defying fort to accomplish such a feat. And this terrifying ultimate weapon was currently lying quietly in the dark domain behind the fleet. This was also one of the greatest reliance of this man for his rebellion against Midsurda. On the other hand, the apocalypses on the ship were able to guarantee an absolute advantage in a head-on battle. Not to mention that the people in the seats were not in Midsurda due to various circumstances. Even if there were people in the seats who rushed back, as long as they were not in the top 3 seats, the apocalypses on the ship would be able to delete them along with the execution ship. The reason why the top 3 seats were not included was not because they could not be deleted, but because the top 3 seats had strong intuition. Furthermore, even without the execution ship, they could use their physical bodies to break through the world barrier in the blink of an eye and avoid being locked on by the apocalypses. Yes. Wipe out our enemies from the face of the earth. Long live Loren Visa. The man smiled slightly. Then his eyes suddenly became serious. He shouted with a rare hot-blooded voice. Understood. Please enter the launch password manually. Chapter 458. While the nostalgic commander-in-chief of the Loren Visa fleet was scrambling to find the launch code for the final weapon, Su Shinqing was not idle either. The situation is not optimistic. Old Man Hu, the goat of the Magic Science Research Society, was livid. Although he had been caught off guard by Lablay's spell and couldn't even speak, he was still the president of the Magic Science Research Society after all. He was well versed in the magical knowledge of many worlds in the multiverse. In addition to the mysticism of the Ether Church, it wasn't difficult for him to reverse engineer and dispel the spell. As for the second-in-command of the Dimensional Garrison, he had tried to restrain Molly while Su Shenxing was fighting the man in a suit. However, he had been insta-killed by Molly. Even now, he was still standing by the side like a stone statue. I can't contact the society. I don't know if the communication in this galaxy is blocked, or if there is a problem with the society. Old Man Who said dejectedly. Although no matter what the situation was, it was not good news. It's the same for us. The society's dedicated channel has lost its function. There might be an ether expert among the rebels this time. Sammy Alfredo, who was wearing a hood, said softly.
What was more dangerous was that although the second-in-command of the Dimensional Garrison had been subdued, who knew how many more spies there were in the 4 major organizations?
Once Su Shenxing and Mo Li, who were the most powerful people present, left this place, those who were hiding in the dark might immediately launch an attack. If they were caught unaware, it would be too disadvantageous for everyone present. In short, I think it's better to go to the initial star first. The representative of the Space Administration, Roland, who was the dispirited uncle from before, suggested. Su Shenxing understood what the initial star meant after Lux's explanation.
Simply put, the initial star was the origin of the Mid-Serta civilization in this world, the home planet of the Mid-Serta people, and also the administrative center of this world. If the 4 major organizations represented the limbs of the human body, then the initial star would be the head that gave out orders.
Roland's intention was very clear. If the first star was attacked, then it would be equivalent to them going there to save the king. If the first star was not affected by the rebellion, then they would at least be able to understand how Mid-Serta's higher-ups would deal with this disaster. Old Man Who naturally wouldn't object. Even Sammy Alfredo, who usually didn't get along well with Roland, didn't object.
As for the Dimensional Garrison, after the general and the second-in-command died, the person who received the order in the face of danger naturally didn't have any leeway to object in front of this group of experienced people.
Su Shenxing ignored Mo Li's struggle and rubbed his face while thinking about his next move. Logically speaking, he didn't want to risk his life for Mid-Serta for no reason. However, although he didn't blow up the suited man with a single punch, he did beat the crap out of him. It wasn't much different. He was probably on the rebel army's blacklist.
Even if he used the Holy Sword to slice open space and return to Earth, it might end up causing Earth to be affected by the dimensional war.
Rather than that, he might as well take some time to beat the shit out of the rebels and completely solve the problem. At the same time, he could also do a favor to the Mid-Serta civilization. Who knows, it might be useful in the future. Thinking until here, Su Shenxing stopped what he was doing and nodded slightly under Lux's expectant gaze. Then I'll also help a little.
Ignoring Luke's pleasantly surprised expression, Jasmine, who was at the side, covered her flushed little face and revealed an expression that looked like she was about to cry.
However, after arriving at the surface of the planet, the group discovered that the space stations with teleportation portals had been blown up. It seemed that the suited man had placed bombs on all the space stations before sneaking into the venue. Since the fastest way was gone, they could only settle for the next best thing. As the executive officer, Lux released the duty ship stored in his gun. Then, the group boarded the duty ship and began to head toward the first star. Through the screen on the bridge, Su Shenxing discovered that the huge lotus-like object on the planet below was withering at a speed visible to the naked eye. It began to turn into ashes starting from the tip. It seems that the leader is really dead. Lux followed his gaze and sighed. Mid-Serta has lost another one. Are there very few people in this civilization? Su Shenxing asked curiously. Yes, it is said that the original people of Mid-Serta weren't like this. Instead, they had the same size, appearance and habits as you people on Earth. However, there was a problem when they explored the multiverse. The survivors of the entire civilization transformed into that appearance. Although they obtained an almost eternal lifespan and vast knowledge, they lost the ability to continue to reproduce. Since Mid-Serta is a super civilization that can already explore other worlds, then can't they even do things like cloning? Su Shenxing couldn't help but feel a little strange. Of course, that's not a problem. However, Mid-Serta is a civilization that respects life very much. Although they won't force other civilizations to agree with their values, They themselves hate cloning and other technologies that, in their opinion, play with life.
Lux shrugged.
That's why Mid-Surda is one less person. Now, the 4 major organizations are almost all controlled by people from other worlds like us.
Indeed, whether it was Roland of the Space Administration, Sammy Alfredo of the Ether Order, Old Man Who of the Goat, or Fat General who was dead, none of the high-ranking officials who controlled the real power of the 4 major organizations were Mid-Surda people.
Is that so? Su Shenxing pondered for a moment.
When he was about to say something, the bridge of the duty ship suddenly rang with an ear-piercing alarm.
How can it be? The hyperdrive mode is not working.
Although they were in the same universe, this planet was obviously more than a few 100,000 light-years away from the original star. With the speed of the duty ship, if they flew over, they would have probably turned into fossils. Therefore, they naturally had to use the hyperdrive ability that was used in all interstellar works.
However, the moment Lux's duty ship was about to enter the hyperdrive, it was interrupted by an unknown force. Lux, release the probe. The target is the position of GS-7323. Roland looked down at the radar-like light screen and suddenly said loudly. Lux, who didn't know what was going on, naturally did as he was told. Then, a strange object appeared on the screen of the bridge. What is this? The old man with the goatee was stunned. In short, it was a starfish. A supermassive starfish that was similar in size to the planet.
We're in trouble.
Sammy Alfredo of the Ether Order said helplessly, that's a biological UK. Chapter 459. Requesting Backup. I repeat, we are the 17th Regiment of the Dimensional Garrison. We are currently under attack from the enemy's phase cannon. Requesting backup. In the stronghold guarding the entrance to the Mid-Surda dimension, the signaler hid in a bunker and repeated the request for backup over and over again. The planet's stronghold that originally had the ability to activate the interference field and prevent spaceships from other dimensions from warping into the Mid-Surda world was on the verge of collapse. In fact, there were a total of 32 such planet strongholds. As long as half of them were functioning normally, the interference field would not be a problem. However, since the start of the war, there were already 16 strongholds that had lost contact. If their stronghold also fell, then the interference field would immediately be paralyzed. The Mid-Surda world would also become a defenseless and naked woman. From the perspective of the universe, the originally perfect sphere stronghold was now like an apple that had been bitten several times. Its surface had become uneven. This was the masterpiece of the phase cannon. Compared to traditional artillery, as long as the precise coordinates of the phase cannon could be obtained, the power of each shot could be maximized. It was almost impossible for the external armor to interfere with it. Moreover, although it could not be compared to a law weapon like the Apocalypse, the phase cannon was still a weapon that could attack from outside the world. Although there was a delay in each shot, as long as several spaceships equipped with phase cannons attacked together, they would be able to reap considerable results. If the stronghold had not immediately determined the enemy's weapon after being attacked and began to warp to avoid it, it would have been riddled with holes long ago. Even so, the current situation was still overwhelmingly unfavorable. The signaler's continuous calls for backup were of no use. The only thing that filled the dimensional communication channel was the desperate screams of the signalers when their own fleet was destroyed. When the explosion occurred on the stronghold once again, the lights in the stronghold suddenly went out. Although the emergency lights were turned on because the backup power was connected, and the stronghold regained its light, the signaler knew that everything was too late. The attack just now was very likely to have hit the stronghold's energy furnace, causing the main energy furnace to be scrapped. It might even have caused a second explosion that blew a piece of the planet's stronghold into the universe. However, this was not the main point. The enemy would definitely not let go of the moment when the interference field was no longer effective. He raised his head and looked through the special glass skylight of the signal room to see the usually dark universe. At this moment, many golden ripples appeared in the originally dim star field. One space-time battleship after another entered the universe through the ripples. Mid-Surda is finished. The portable signaling device in the hands of the signaler fell to the ground. Fortunately, the quality of the military equipment in Mid-Surda was reliable. Even though it was dropped, the indicator light of the gadget was still blinking, indicating that it was still working faithfully. However, the owner of the gadget did not seem to notice this at all. He only muttered to himself, "It's all over." That's UK 051's
Sea planet. The hooded figure from the Ether Order was explaining to Su Shunxing and the others what kind of monster they were facing.
Its information distortion isn't that big. It's just a normal cosmic life form.
However, the problem was that it could disregard the conservation of mass and energy and carry out unlimited division without eating.
Even now, we don't know whether the thing in front of us is a split body or the main body. I'm not very good at dealing with this kind of thing. Su Shunxing murmured. Then what should we do?
Lux was at a loss.
Just ignore it for now. It's better to rush to the initial star as soon as possible. As long as we can end this rebellion, it won't be too late to slowly deal with these big starfish. Roland could only settle for the next best thing. But before they could start moving, the starfish approached them. Does it want to prey on us?
The old man with the goatee frowned and asked the hooded figure.
Probably. Our experiments haven't reached this guy yet. Almost all of our understanding of its characteristics comes from the records of the seventh seat. The hooded figure replied, so I don't know what its food habits are.
Blow up anything in front of us with the main cannon.
Business is more important.
Roland decisively ordered.
Unfortunately, this can't be done. Unless it's an annihilation-type attack. Otherwise, once it's blown up, no matter how many pieces it breaks into, it will regenerate the number of pieces. The hooded figure of Ether Order continued. Can't we avoid it and warp? Hearing this, Roland became impatient. We don't have that much time to play hide and seek with this starfish. Even if the starfish's information distortion is not large, it is still an individual with information distortion. It has a considerable impact on the information technology-based executive ship. To completely avoid the starfish's information distortion, the ship's mainframe needs to correct the surrounding information errors and warp data for more than 10 minutes. Old Man who was more knowledgeable in this area, shook his head. When they thought that these starfish might have spread throughout the entire Mid-Serta universe, they felt a headache coming on. As a result, the most powerful information technology in Mid-Serta was almost completely blocked. The remaining executive officers of the Space Administration who did not have a seat could not warp at will. They could not even fly out of the galaxy where the Space Administration was located for a short period of time. Wait a minute, I only said that I'm not good at dealing with these things that keep regenerating, but I didn't say that I can't deal with them. At this time, Su Shunxing suddenly said, Really? Mr. Su, what can you do? Lux could not help but ask excitedly.
Emily, it's your turn.
Leave it to me.
Emily patted his flat chest expressionlessly.
Just like what Su Shunxing said, to deal with these things that could split and regenerate infinitely, Su Shunxing might only be able to use the Holy Sword of the End to completely erase all karma. But Emily was much simpler. He could directly curse these things to death. Just as Emily was about to say something, a sudden change occurred. A piercing alarm suddenly sounded in the bridge, and at the same time, a bright red warning light lit up. Warning. A large-scale change in the universe's information has been detected. Warning. A large-scale deletion of the law's information has been detected. Warning. The ship is in an extremely dangerous situation. It is recommended to warp. Before the mechanical sound in the bridge had finished, Su Shunxing suddenly realized that the space outside the ship was constantly being peeled off. A large amount of ether poured in from the crack, and in an instant, it filled the space that was originally part of the Mid-Serta universe. Chapter 460. Is it an antimatter weapon that eliminates space? Roland could not help but ask in shock as he saw the strange scene. Antimatter weapons cannot eliminate space itself. Old Man whose voice sounded a little bitter. It's either a void weapon or a law weapon. In theory, only these two things can tear apart the barrier of the world. I didn't expect that someone would actually develop such a thing. You guys couldn't develop such a weapon? Although the situation outside looked very frightening, Su Shunxing was clearly not too worried about it, and even had the time to ask the old man. Originally, there was some research in this area, and to a certain extent, there were some results. However, due to funding issues and the excessive destructive power, it was likely to cause unease in the entire multiverse, so in the end, the higher-ups stopped our project.
The old man replied with a sullen face.
At that time, we had no objections to the decision of the higher-ups, because in the research, we had already noticed that we were coming into contact with a terrible power. It has no other use other than destruction. It is the most evil of evil, a power that comes from the realm of destruction, a weapon of demons that should never exist in this world. Even the emergence of a superficial concept would cause great destruction to the world. After a pause, he continued. However, I'm afraid that we have all been deceived. Aside from Mid-Surda, none of the known civilizations have the ability to develop such a weapon. The results of the Magic Science Research Society may have been stolen. As he spoke, the entire ship shook violently. The warp has failed. Get ready, the impact is coming. Lux shouted with a panicked expression. However, in the next moment, the expected impact did not come.
In Old Man Who's words, the most evil of evil weapon was not able to destroy the ship, which was so fragile in the face of the majesty of the world.
Everyone was confused. Now, the people on the bridge were all big shots in their own fields. Although they did not have broad horizons, they still had basic knowledge. Now, the attack on the ship and even the entire planetary system was definitely not a bluff.
This point could be seen from the fact that a part of the universe outside had been torn apart and annihilated.
Even so, Lux, the mass-produced ship, was still as calm as a mountain in the face of such an attack. It was unbelievable. In fact, it was not just them. Even the commander of the rebel fleet far away in the dark domain was dumbfounded. Even the shipboard Apocalypse cannon's power was far more powerful than that, and yet the ship that was reported to be nothing special still existed in the Sea of Ether even after an entire planetary system had been vaporized. Only Su Shenxing vaguely understood what was going on.
Previously, he had heard that the mainstream technology of the Space Administration was information technology. Although the specific principles were not clear, it was probably on the path of information affecting energy/matter. Although this was the first time he had seen this kind of technology tree, judging from the current situation, the weapons under this technology tree were somewhat similar to the concept attacks he had encountered before.
Concept attacks were very unreasonable. They could practically ignore all defenses and resistances and directly deal conceptual damage to the target. But at the same time, Su Shenxing, who had fought this type of enemy several times, knew that although the concept attack was powerful, it also had many limitations. The most important point was that it needed to have a certain degree of understanding of the individual that was exerting the concept attack. After technology had developed to the level of Mid-Surda, most of the physical laws of the universe in this world should have been grasped by the civilization. In this case, they could even use computers to simulate the operation of the universe and achieve a similar effect of foresight. After that, with the Space Administration's exploration of other worlds, all kinds of worlds were discovered and successfully observed. Naturally, their universal constants were also grasped by Mid-Surda.
It was because of this that the weapon that could erase the world itself was born. In addition, this weapon should have a mechanism that could automatically eliminate errors to ensure that even if the universal constants were different from the type that had been observed, it would still be effective.
But Su Shenxing and Jasmine, these two fellows, were not among them. In calculations that could easily reach tens of digits, it was normal for the number after the decimal point to be regarded as an error. But what if the error was a number of millions of digits? Obviously, the calculation itself would not be valid if that happened. Rather than getting to the bottom of this, I think you should prioritize finding the enemy. Seeing that the people in the bridge began to make wild guesses, Su Shenxing could not help but cough and said to Lux. The execution ship itself was a vehicle that needed to cross worlds to perform missions. Therefore, if it simply came to the Sea of Ether outside the world, it would not have much impact on the execution ship. By the way, the sea planet seemed to have fallen into the gap between worlds. God knows if it would be annihilated in the Sea of Ether or drift to other worlds. Yes, I think so too.
The decadent Uncle Roland, who had no time nor interest to care about the sea planet, nodded.
And in any case, we have come to the outside world. The Mid-Surda world itself has an interference field. If we want to enter, we can only do so after reporting and obtaining permission. With the current situation, the Central Bureau of the Space Administration should not have the time to deal with our report.
Although that's true. But Sir Roland, Lux opened his mouth wide as if he did not know what to say.
After hesitating for a moment, he reported truthfully, my execution ship was unable to detect the interference field on the Mid-Surda world barrier. What did you say? Roland asked sternly. The other people in the bridge also showed an expression of disbelief. The interference field is gone? Could it be that it has failed? At this time? Hey, isn't this bad? Could it be the rebels? Then the bridge became noisy.
Indeed, for the residents of Mid-Surda, as long as the interference field did not disappear, then no matter what happened inside, it would at most be internal strife.
But the current situation was obviously not so. None of the people present were fools. They quickly understood what the current situation meant. The battle situation has expanded, and Mid-Sirta is at a disadvantage. This information suddenly appeared in everyone's mind. Silence! Roland shouted and deterred the people who were whispering below. But after that, he was also a little hesitant. Should they continue to stay outside the world to look for the enemy with a dangerous weapon? Or should they immediately rush back to Mid-Sirta to help? Excuse me, what do you think we should do now?
Archbishop Sammy Alfredo, who was the man wearing a cloak and a hood from the Ether Order, suddenly asked Su Shunxing respectfully.
Are you asking me? Su Shunxing was stunned and could not help but laugh.
Indeed, as the savior, he had invincible power. But in fact, the larger the scale of a war, the smaller the role Su Shunxing could play. If it was a planet-level war, he could at least use his combat power to shatter the continental shelf with one punch to scare and destroy the enemy's army. But when the war expanded to the scale of a galaxy, although old Su could also choose to fight with less destructive methods such as punching a black hole, it was more likely that other than Su Shunxing and Mo Li, both the enemy and himself would die together. When the war expanded to the scale of a galaxy, Su Shunxing had no other choice but to directly blow up the entire galaxy. After all, when his destructive power was magnified to a certain level, there was no way to retract it into a precise attack. And if the war expanded to the scale of a world, like the time in the Great Demonic Realm, there was basically no other choice but to destroy the entire world. In the end, if the so-called hero wanted to save the world, he would have to find the Demon King first. Obviously, the scale of this war was also world-class. Su Shunxing felt that with his size, even if he was thrown into a galaxy, his role would be very limited. He could not possibly destroy the world again, right? In the end, if it's a rebellion, the enemy must have a leader, right? After thinking for a while, Su Shunxing decided to use the decapitation tactic he was best at. He opened his mouth and said, "Can you find out where they are now?"
Well, Lux smiled bitterly.
Sorry, we don't even know who the enemy is now. His words also caused the other people present to turn pale. The enemy had already started to abuse them, and they still did not know where the enemy came from. As the most advanced civilization in the multiverse, it was really embarrassing. But Su Shunxing did not put his hopes on this group of people from the beginning. Although the technology was good, it was too slow to take effect. At the crucial moment, they still had to rely on the shroud technique. So Su Shunxing looked at Mo Li. It turned out that Mo Li was eating a jam muffin that came out of nowhere. The little girl noticed Su Shunxing's gaze and raised her little face to stare blankly at Su Shunxing for a while. Then, she blinked her beautiful eyes and stuffed the half-eaten jam muffin into his hand. Ignoring the jam at the corner of her mouth, she sat cross-legged on the floor. Then, she licked her index fingers that were still stained with jam, turned them over her head, and made a meditative gesture. This made Su Shunxing, who was holding the muffin that was still oozing jam and looked sticky, could not help but complain.
"Isho you."
Mo Li obviously ignored old Su's complaint. After a while, she opened her eyes and pointed in a direction. "There's a battle over there. This is the Sea of Ether. Under normal circumstances, spatial awareness is not applicable here."
Lux whispered.
There was no concept of direction, distance, or even space in the Sea of Ether. Everything was just chaos. Even if it was to go to a known world, spaceships had to move according to the Ether channel. If they relied on the performance of the ship to drive randomly, it was easy to get lost in time and space. The best example was a certain seventh seat who was lost for 3,000 years.
"It's okay, let's go and take a look," as she said.
Su Shunxing did not hesitate to believe in Mo Li's judgment. "Wait a minute, I don't think it's the time to play," Roland retorted. Although he had seen Su Shunxing's planet-level combat power, he obviously did not want to follow the path pointed out by Mo Li, who was unreliable no matter how he looked at it. Instead of looking for a battle, it's better to just jump back to Mid-Sirta and go to the first star.
"Don't you think so?"
His last sentence was said to the other two leaders present. "We, the Ether Order, support this gentleman's choice." Sammy Alfredo did not hesitate to backstab him. "Hey, is this the time to fight?" Roland said with a sullen face. "It's not fighting, I'm just following the choice of the Ether." Hood said softly. "Although I really want to go to the initial star, since this otherworlder saved my life, I still have to show him some respect."
I also agree to look for a place of battle.
Old man who stroked his beard and said, Officer Roland. Lux looked at Roland, who had returned to his decadent appearance.
Okay, the minority obeys the majority. Let's go to the place, this girl said.
Roland heaved a long sigh and compromised.
Lux responded and steered the ship in the direction pointed out by Mo Lee. In the end, it didn't take long for the ship to rush into a purple mist. Even with Midsurda's technology, they were unable to see through the purple smoke. Almost all of the detection systems had lost their function. But judging from the data displayed on the instrument, they seemed to have plunged into a strange world.
This is
Old man who pushed away the technicians and occupied the reading screen by himself.
The expression on his old face kept changing. What the hell is this?
Su Shenxing asked curiously.
It's a dock.
Simply put, it's a temporary mini-world.
Because the ship stays in the sea of ether for too long, not only does it consume a lot of energy, but it also easily damages some parts of the ship. Therefore, when the ship performs a mission outside the world for a long time, it stops in this mini-world to prevent that from happening.
But the problem is...
Old man who took a deep breath. Damn it, this is also the research result of our society.
It was plagiarized before it was even published.
The old man punched the screen and almost couldn't catch his breath. This is too shameless.
Your society has already been infiltrated into a sieve. Su Shenxing muttered silently in his heart. Not long after, the ship finally passed through the world barrier of the mini-world. Everyone's eyes suddenly opened up. However, the next moment, the huge beam of light almost pierced through the ship, scaring everyone on the bridge. What appeared in front of them was a battlefield. Chapter 461. Rather than calling the process of the apocalypse a canon, it would be more accurate to call it irradiation. It was a continuous process of deleting the world's data. Obviously, the commander of the rebel fleet did not realize that there were two sets of abnormal data that could not be deleted on one of the executive ships in Midsurda. However, he wasn't a brainless person. After the warning window of abnormal data popped up on the main control computer, he didn't follow the instructions written in the Apocalypse user manual to correct the error after correcting the data and irradiating it a second time. The reason was simple. If there was an error in a single ship's apocalypse, then it would be fine to proceed according to the normal situation. However, the problem was that he had used all 12 apocalypse gates that were supposed to be used on the fortress, but all of them had the same error. One error could be described as a coincidence, but if all 12 apocalypse gates had the same error at the same time, it was definitely not a normal phenomenon. Something must have happened in the star system that he did not know about. At this point, there were only two options left for him. The first was to pretend that nothing had happened and ignore the problem in the star system. He would mobilize the fleet to eliminate the garrison in Midsurda and wipe out the entire Midsurda's upper echelons. The second option was to not let go of the star system. Even if it meant delaying the overall attack, he had to solve the problem there. Without any hesitation, he chose the first option. Initially, he used the apocalypse to eliminate the star system so that he could nip all the abnormalities that might affect the overall attack in the bud. However, things did not go as he wished. The 12 apocalypse gates irradiation did not work at the same time. If he continued to insist on eliminating the abnormalities in the star system, he would be putting the cart before the horse. In comparison, as long as he could eliminate all the Midsurda's upper echelons, even if there were some abnormalities, the enemy would not be able to make a comeback. As the fortress was destroyed, the Vanguard fleet had already broken into the Midsurda world and engaged in a fierce exchange of fire with the garrison there. It had to be said that the Midsurda was indeed one of the most advanced civilizations in the known multiverse. Even if they could not react in time at first, leading to the destruction of many of their forces and even 2 planetary fortresses, by the time the enemy stopped their counterattack, they had still caused considerable damage to the Vanguard fleet. Very good. The Vanguard fleet has attracted the attention of most of the enemy's forces. Pass down my order to all battleships. Now begin to spread out into 6-winged fleets and begin to warp across worlds. Our target is the first star. Let us directly destroy the heart of Midsurda. The commander-in-chief waved his hand and ordered the mainframe computer. The latter naturally relayed his orders to the other warships. Not long after, the rebel army's main fleet was divided into 6 fleets, preparing to surround the first star. The reason why they did not warp together was because the warp of too many spaceships would make the world extremely unstable. If there was a slight accident at this time, the resulting dimensional turbulence could easily affect the spaceships. Drifting into an unknown world was still a good thing, but the worst thing was to be directly torn into pieces by the dimensional turbulence. One of the rebel army's fleets showed them such a situation. Halfway through the warp, the fluctuating dimensions were hit by a prismatic beam, and the entire space shattered just like that. Almost 120,000 spaceships disappeared without a trace, either blown up or wandering to some strange place. Then, the last three-winged fleet that had not warped saw the culprit that caused the situation. It was a starship that was much larger than the usual ship, and its appearance looked a little like an outdated antique. Compared to the rebel warships, it was like a Nokia N81 surrounded by a group of pair 7s. On both sides of the ship, the number 7 of the mid-Serta civilization was painted with paint that could not be eroded by the turbulence. Why would the 7th seat appear in a place like this? The rebel commander slammed the mainframe computer hard. Isn't she repairing the ship? And what's the defense system of the dock-eating sh*T? But the latter obviously could not answer his previous question, and could only reply honestly. The version that the Magic Science Research Society released before has not developed the defense system, and the one we stole is also this version. Damn it! Because of the 7th seat's interference, only the first 2 wings of nearly 240,000 spaceships had successfully warped to the first star. 1 wing was missing, and the remaining 3 wings of nearly 400,000 spaceships were blocked here. After getting over his anger, the rebel commander immediately began to adjust his orders. Now begin the warp across worlds in units of 5,000. The rest of the spaceships, block the 7th seat ship, and don't let it continue to cause trouble. 5,000 spaceships warping together would still cause dimensional turbulence, but it was obviously much smaller than the 120,000 spaceships, and mixed in with the army of 400,000, there were countless meat shields, and it was difficult for the enemy to attack them. At the same time, 5,000 spaceships was a combat force that could not be ignored, and the intermittent warping to the first star was enough to play a considerable role. What's more, maybe the damn 7th seat would not even last a few seconds and would be torn to pieces by the main cannons of countless spaceships. He stared coldly at the starship on the screen that was shifting between countless cannons, and said in a deep voice, "Very well. Let me see how many seconds you can last for mid-Serta at the cost of your own life." Why does this annoying premonition always come true every time I have it? Ing curled up in the pilot's seat, holding the control stick in her hand. This was a part of her 3,000-year-old model. More than 2,000 years ago, the new model of ship had eliminated manual operation. "You're too impulsive," the main control computer of the Violet said. "I think so too," the girl shouted as she tried to move the control stick. To be honest, the manual control mode was really a big help. If it was purely on autopilot, the ship would probably be shot down in a few seconds. After all, there were nearly 400,000 main cannons and many secondary cannons. Just calculating the trajectory of these dimensional weapons was enough to cause the main control computer to crash. But Ing was an exception. As UK-002, her perception was simply outrageous. Almost every time the enemy fired, she could always find a way to dodge. But this was already the limit. After all, the performance of a 3,000-year-old antique was still there. Just dodging was already exhausting, and it was impossible to stop the warping spaceships in this situation. No, if this goes on, it won't be able to delay them at all. Please don't continue to do dangerous things, you have already done your duty. I'm sorry, Violet. But mid-Serta is my second home. It wasn't easy to return home after wandering for 3,000 years. I don't want to lose it. What's more, in order to repay the kindness of the Lord who took me away from the sea of suffering, even if there are some unpleasant memories, I don't mind. The girl let go of the handle and lowered her eyes. Her long eyelashes cast fine shadows on her face under the illumination of the light. She said softly, "I'm sorry, I might have to do something a little more reckless. I wish you good luck, my master." The next moment, the Violet was hit by the main cannon, and more than 30% of the ship's hull was vaporized just like that. Inside the quake-like bridge, the girl clutched her chest and said softly with a murmur, "Sprout, UK-002, the cancer of the world, the dock. Or rather, the world of the artificial world had a crack." Almost all the main control computers of the battleship issued a violent alarm. That guy intends to awaken the power of the cancer of the world and destroy the artificial world and the fleet together. The commander-in-chief's eyes were cold. In this situation, the cannons were useless.
The main cannons on the ship would only give the enemy nutrients to grow, and because UK was an abnormal data, even the illumination of the apocalypse could not delete it.
TSK, what a lunatic.
All ship emergency evasive maneuvers. Withdraw from the dock.
However, at this moment, the alarm in the bridge stopped abruptly. Because the change was too sudden, it caused him to not be able to react for a moment.
What's going on?
The main control computer did not answer him.
Instead, it sent the image of the optical telescope to the main screen.
It was a new space-time ship.
The halos on both sides of the ship meant that it had just warped into this artificial world not long ago.
The number 62 painted on the ship meant that it was the duty ship of the Space Administration, and it was the 62nd ship out of the new 100.
If it was in the past, let alone the 62nd ship, he would not even care about the 32nd ship.
But at this critical moment, the appearance of the other party was very strange.
Wait, what are those two things on the bridge?
What's with these ships? They're at least large battleships, and there are even dreadnoughts behind them.
Lux looked at the battleships that were more numerous than ants and could not help but feel a chill in his heart. This is not good.
Old man who could only keep repeating this sentence.
Mid-Sarda, this is the end.
What's with the alarm just now?
Roland asked Lux.
It seems like there was a change in space, but it's gone now. Wait, where did Mr. Sue and that girl go? Lux answered casually, but then he realized that something was wrong. Su Shenxing and Mo Li, who were just beside him, had disappeared from the bridge.
As for those two,
the hooded high priest of the Ether Church pointed to the back.
They just went out.
Went out.
Lux was speechless. What?
At this time, outside of Lux's duty ship's bridge, Su Shenxing was standing against the wind, although there was no wind. After all, the artificial world was only used to temporarily stop space-time ships. The cost of filling it with air and the cost of vacuum were two different things, so of course they would choose the cheaper vacuum. In fact, this space might be even more dangerous than the universe. In addition to the vacuum, there were the energy waves left behind by the main cannons and the wreckage of various secondary cannons. There was even the fluctuation of laws caused by the apocalypse. Ordinary humans would probably die as soon as they appeared. But Su Shenxing and Mo Li were not ordinary people. After sensing that the distant Ing had awakened the power that could destroy the world in her body, Su Shenxing and Mo Li left the bridge to suppress the power of the other party and solve the current situation in the shortest time possible.
Mo Li.
Su Shenxing summoned Mo Li. As the crack in the artificial world became bigger, he said to Mo Li, "Help me lock on to the target. Just calculate according to the power of my attack."
Mo Li. Meow meow meow.
Su Shenxing pinched her little face. "You can act cute when we get home. It's time to do something serious. I'm starting to miss dinner at home."
Me too. Then hurry up and help.
Su Shenxing turned around and looked at the battleships that seemed to be glowing at them, and said through the mental link, "This world is just a man-made fake world, so it doesn't matter if you put in a little more effort. I'm almost tired of this dirty light."
Wah!
Chapter 462. Behind the nightmare world, there was another world in the depths of the dark area. To be precise, it should be something that was once a world. Although it was somewhat similar to the fragments of a world, it was not fragmented to the extent of fragmentation. It was just that the source was damaged and the laws were incomplete. The entire universe was also in the extreme state of birth and destruction at the same time. There was only one reason why the world had not collapsed yet. At the center of the world, there was a singularity that maintained everything in the world. Even if the laws of physics were incomplete, even if time and space could not operate, as long as the singularity still existed, then the world would not collapse. Logically speaking, a world like this could not give birth to civilization. However, what was surprising was that there was indeed a civilization in this world. The so-called singularity that maintained the entire world was the only remaining artificial planet of the civilization, the last planet named by the builder with the name of the civilization itself, Lorenvisa. Along with a light sizzling noise, the cocoon-like door of the life support cabin quietly slid open. A well-built man walked out from inside. His hair stood straight as if it completely ignored artificial gravity, forming a shape similar to the so-called broom head on Earth. But because of the uneven length of the hair, it was actually more like a burning torch.
"Your Majesty."
The old man guarding outside the cabin saluted him.
You only rested for 3 minutes.
Don't you need to rest for a while more? No need to be polite, Radhibahim.
The man waved his hand and said with a cold expression, 3 minutes of deep sleep is enough.
Now is the critical moment to decide the future of Loren Visa.
As the last king, I can't be lazy at this time.
As they spoke, they had already walked to the aisle outside the room. There was something similar to a window on the outside of the aisle.
Of course, because of the lack of laws, it was stupid to directly contact the outside world, so in fact, this place was completely isolated from the outside world.
The so-called window was just a display installed so that the residents would not be too surprised.
However, what was displayed on the display was the scene that could be seen from here. At this time, from the display screen, one could see that a star not far away was constantly repeating the process of igniting, collapsing, extinguishing, and then igniting again.
For the former Loren Visa civilization, it was a sun-like existence that brought warmth and energy needed for life. But now, if the planet they were born on was still there, it would only be swallowed by this star during its transformation into a red giant. The world was no longer normal.
Even with the singularity, the artificial planet Loren Visa could barely maintain the status quo. But if this continued, the collapse of the world was inevitable. It was precisely because he was well aware of this, and after living in this kind of world for nearly 10,000 years, Loren Visa, who continued to have enough strength, would raise his iron hooves of revenge against the culprit, Midsurda, and swing the hammer of sanctions against that civilization.
The inheritance of knowledge from generation to generation allowed Dajita to possess the memories of more than 100 emperors, and at the same time, he also inherited the hatred of more than 100 people. The strength that his predecessors had accumulated through enduring hardships and enduring humiliation to survive had finally reached a qualitative change in his generation. The development of several decisive weapons, including the apocalypse, had also given him the confidence to pull back the curtain on the aftermath of the war from 10,000 years ago. And judging from the current situation, the results were remarkable. When he came to the Kingdom Hall, the various branch plans displayed on countless screens seemed to be proceeding in an orderly manner, and the ministers in charge of each branch plan were also doing their best to deal with all the situations. It would be better to say that Midsurda's performance was too weak. It was as if all the hard work he had put in to accumulate strength over the years had been in vain. Many of his backup plans had not been used, and the plan had already succeeded by more than half. This made him feel a little unsatisfied.
Brother!
At this time, a little girl stumbled out of the inner court.
Your Highness Tobble. His Majesty has already succeeded the throne. The way you address him should have been changed a little. The old man who was serving Dajita said to the girl in a rigid tone.
The girl immediately pursed her lips, timidly as if she was about to cry. It's fine. Only Tarbal and I are left of the royal blood of Loren Visa. It doesn't matter if she is a little willful. However, Dajita himself did not mind at all. He hugged the girl with one hand and softly comforted her. The little girl immediately smiled through her tears. Brother, this is the rest of my nutritious meal. Do you want to eat it? The girl took out a few toothpaste-like things and handed them to Dajita. Her two big eyes blinked, looking very cute. Because there was only one artificial planet left, the food was naturally only synthetic food. Naturally, the taste and so on could not be expected. Even as the royal family, Dajita and the others did not have much preferential treatment. At most, the nutritious meals had some special flavors. Obviously, the girl had saved the flavors she liked and left them for him to eat. This made Dajita feel gratified and a little sad at the same time. He had left this world and gone to other worlds.
Many worlds were different from this world on the verge of destruction and had many rich resources. On some planets suitable for human survival, there were even many foods that could be eaten directly, and they were all very delicious.
In contrast, the synthetic food of Loren Visa was like a slightly salty dog shit. Whenever that happened, he couldn't help but want to steal a few ecological planets and bring them to Loren Visa. But in the end, he resisted. The dimensional earthquake caused by a large number of life forms passing through the conventional world was easily detected by the Space Administration of Midsurda, and most life forms could not survive in the chaotic world of Loren Visa. So for the sake of the overall situation, Dajita had to resist the impulse in his heart every time. He only brought back the planets that contained the minerals he needed to Loren Visa as raw materials for the military industry.
No need, Tobble.
Dajita pushed the girl's things back into the girl's hands, and a slight smile appeared on his cold face. Don't worry, we will soon have food that is 100 times better than this. As long as the Mid-Serta civilization could be defeated, then Loren Visa would be revived. Even if all the people were brought out of this world on the verge of destruction, it would not matter. Really? The little girl seemed to be very happy with the news. Is there really something better than lizard-flavored synthetic food? Lizard? Dagita stared at the toothpaste in the girl's hand with the head of a cloaked lizard painted on it, and suddenly felt that he should talk to the Minister of the Food Cooperation Department to prevent the soldiers from mutiny because of the bad food. Just as Dagita's mind was thinking about some nonsense, suddenly a minister's panicked report came into his ears. Your Majesty, the main fleet encountered an abnormal energy outbreak, and more than half of them have been lost. This made Dagita's expression turn back to cold and serious again. After the girl stood aside obediently, he looked at the minister and the floating monitor beside him. Did they encounter the stubborn resistance of Mid-Serta on the initial star? Although Dagita only glanced at it briefly, he could still see some clues from the data. The remaining starships seemed to be gathered near Mid-Serta's initial star, and they were still in a fierce crossfire. In this case, the large number of casualties should be swept away by the superweapon on Mid-Serta's initial star. Although he had expected Mid-Serta to strongly resist the decapitation operation, he did not expect the other party to hide such strength. The spies of the Magic Science Research Society didn't know about the superweapon in advance. If that's the case, it's better to consider the possibility of the other party having an underground research institute. Dagita muttered softly as he did not expect this to happen. This would be a little troublesome. Fortunately, it was not that there was no way to deal with it. Although the other party had destroyed nearly half of his main fleet, there was still half left. Theoretically, it could be done by using the superweapon one more time, so why drag it out until now when it was still a normal crossfire? Perhaps the superweapon was a one-time use, or it needed to be on cooldown. Of course, although he did have a backup fleet as a support force, if the superweapon was only on cooldown, sending the backup fleet out would not play a decisive role, and it would be easy for the other party to wipe them out again. In this case, it would be safer to directly use the world-class Apocalypse with the highest power to directly delete the initial star. Although this would certainly lose a lot of important intelligence data and technical information, after all, he wanted to capture the initial star in the first place for those things, but now was not the time to care about these losses. No, it's not like that. Just as Dagita was about to order the activation of the largest Apocalypse, the minister said with a sour expression, the other half of the starships were destroyed before they could warp to the initial star. Even the dock was destroyed. What? Dagita was stunned, and then his face darkened. Do you know what happened? Your Majesty, at the beginning, His Excellency the Chief Commander stopped the warp because the 7th seat of the Space Administration suddenly broke into the dock and used the main cannon to destroy the space-stabilizing structure during the warp, causing the whereabouts of 120,000 starships to be unknown. But after that, His Excellency the Chief Commander forced the other party into a desperate situation. The 7th seat, the cancer of the world, Because he had planted spies in the Space Administration, it was impossible for Dagita to not know about the sudden return of the 7th seat who had been missing for 3 years. However, he did not expect that the legendary 7th seat would actually interfere in his plans. Could it be that she has awakened the power of her chest? There is a certain possibility. But the problem is, according to the records of the library, the energy explosion of the 7th seat's UK should not be this strong. The minister replied with a puzzled look. Although Ying's cancer of the world did have the power to destroy 9 worlds, her destructive power was not the kind that burst out in one breath, but through the 2 steps of germination and growth for a certain period of time. Only then would it destroy the worlds that she had taken root in. And the price of doing so was that Ying would also die because of the germination, and then wait for the bud and flower to be reborn. As for whether the reborn Ying and the past Ying were the same person, no one knew except for Ying herself. That's right. The minister's eyes lit up as if he had thought of something. Before the abnormal energy explosion, there seemed to be other executive ships that entered the dock. Other executive ships? The top 3 seats? Dagita furrowed his brows and asked. No, it seems to be the 62nd seat. What the hell is the 62nd seat? Dagita carefully recalled and found that he had never heard of the 62nd seat at all. After all, only the top 10 seats were relatively valuable. Even except for the top 3 seats, the other deacons would not have much impact on his plan. The deacons outside the top 10 were just small figures for Loren Visa. Naturally, it was impossible for Dagita to remember them one by one. Is there a record of the 60-second seat in the library? So he asked coldly. Retrieving it, I will send the information to your Majesty's personal terminal.
Wait a minute, according to the information sent back by the warning satellite left by the fleet, the enemy seems to be moving towards this world.
Halfway through the minister's words, a warning signal appeared on the screen he was in charge of. Dagita looked at the information of the 60-second seat called Lux, and found that the other party's greatest achievement was the annihilation of an ancient high-dimensional species.
The other things were basically trivial, especially the most recent mission, which was to go to a fourth-class world to arrest a criminal who might cause a dimensional quake.
It was a little boring.
It seemed that this guy was not a threat, so the one who annihilated the main fleet should be the 7th seat. But even if the 7th seat used the power of the UK to destroy the dock, he should be in a state of great loss. Then there was nothing to be afraid of.
Pass down the order, let the reserve fleet come out to meet the enemy. In order to prevent the enemy from using any strange tactics, there is no need to pursue deep. Just drive the enemy away steadily. He raised his cloak and sat back on his throne majestically. He used his confident voice to stabilize the somewhat shaken morale of the army.
The great plan that I, the late Emperor of Lorraine Wizard, and all the people of this world have been looking forward to for thousands of years will not be disturbed by a few small fries.
When everything is settled, no matter how much trouble they make, it will be useless. Chapter 463.
Perhaps it was because they were in the world gap that communication was not particularly smooth.
The rebels did not seem to be able to immediately figure out how their main fleet, which was left behind in the nightmare world, was wiped out because they did not manage to warp in time. Of course, it was also possible that Su Shenxing's sword was so powerful that even the information was completely wiped out from existence, so the rebels did not receive the warning from the fleet. What was going on was no longer important. What was important was that this situation seemed to have caused a huge error in the rebel army's assessment of the combat strength of this side. Not long after the ship moved forward, they encountered the second wave of the rebel army's fleet. Judging from the paint, it should be a reserve fleet. Naturally, this fleet was also harvested by Su Shenxing's attack. It was only at this time that the rebels seemed to panic. They set up a new nightmare world and then launched a world-level apocalypse, intending to delete Lux's execution ship along with the nightmare world. The result was self-evident. Whether it was Su Shenxing's fleet, or the UK's information distortion following behind them, they were not affected at all. After breaking through the second nightmare world, the execution ship continued to sail for not long and arrived at the suspected destination. In theory, the concept of visible light did not exist in the Sea of Ether, so the human eye could not see anything. The reason why the display screen in the bridge could see the strange scene formed by the aurora was in fact the result of the ship's visualization of the surrounding ether waves. But this theory did not work on Su Shenxing. At this time, he still stayed on the upper deck of the bridge with Emily and looked as far as he could, and what he saw was a world he had never seen before. Su Shenxing was not sure what kind of state the world was in, but the world he saw in the past was generally like a beautiful glass ball. This made him think that his ability to visualize the concept of world may have come from the lattice worlds placed in the window of the great demonic realm.
Because of this inherent concept, the world he saw in the Sea of Ether in the future looked like that.
If he must say, this was probably a manifestation of the world changed by his will. But the world in front of him broke his understanding. If the world he saw in the past was a beautiful crystal ball, then the world in front of him was like a half-eaten dark red apple core. This was not a complete world. Almost subconsciously, he realized the meaning of this situation in his mind. Visitor, please stop here. At this time, a strange voice rang in Su Shenxing's ears. He just realized that a person had appeared outside the world without him knowing. The other party looked very similar to a human male, but he was covered in a thin layer of strange energy field. That was probably why he could not die in this environment. The other party had a torch-like black broom hair, and the clothes on his body were quite luxurious. It was obvious that he was a big shot. In addition, there was a portable device like a thruster behind him. From this point of view, the technological level of the other party's civilization must be very high. At least, it was higher than Mid-Serta. Su Shenxing did not see any similar equipment in Mid-Serta. Even when Lux's ship was anchored in the Sea of Ether, he wore a very bulky spacesuit-like external device. According to him, it could not be too far away from the ship. It was obviously not comparable to the other party's mini-device that could float out of the world. In addition, Emily also felt the existence of extraordinary power from the other party.
But according to his estimation, even if the other party used all the extraordinary power in his body and all the fuel of all the equipment, the maximum power produced would probably only be able to destroy 1 or 2 solar systems, so there should not be too much of a need to be too concerned about this.
In addition, Su Shenxing also found that the other party's pronunciation was very similar to the official language of Mid-Serta.
However, because he did not have any systematic knowledge in this area, it was only a guess.
However, probably out of caution, Lux stopped moving in the bridge below and let the ship float there, so that Su Shenxing could talk to the other party. His deduction was wrong, and it was a big mistake. Dagita was now very anxious. Indeed, the starship of the 62nd executive officer was nothing, but the problem was, what were the 2 guys on the deck of the ship? They actually annihilated Loren Vis's reserve fleet with just 1 attack. When he thought of this, Dagita's heart ached, but he was also surprised by the other party's strength. It must be known that even the fully armed Mid-Serta people could not do this. Could it be that the legendary void creature was real? As for the dock and the accompanying apocalypse not working, it was also within his expectations.
After all, apocalypse was a weapon against the world, so it was natural that it would be greatly reduced when used in the void.
Although I don't know your identity, I presume you don't have too close a relationship with Mid-Serta, right?
He tried hard to calm his mind and said to the other party.
In order to ensure the fluency of the language, he also deliberately used the language of Mid-Serta, which was also considered the most mainstream language in the surrounding sovereign world.
Although Loren Visa still had other decisive weapons, because the reserve fleet was annihilated too quickly, those weapons could not be fully deployed.
Therefore, Dagita risked his life to meet the enemy who destroyed the entire reserve fleet. It would be best if he could persuade them, but if not, he would have to delay enough time to deploy the other decisive weapons. Although according to his identity, he did not have to do it himself, but in this kind of life-and-death situation, he did not intend to put all his hopes in the hands of the ministers.
After all, in a sense, he who had traveled to many other worlds had more experience than the ministers who had been living on artificial planets since childhood.
At the same time, he also received the memories of the past emperors, which made him very mature, and the success rate of persuading the unknown enemy was relatively higher. What's more, he himself was also a strong person, and this conversation with the other party was not completely unprepared. Although he might not necessarily be able to defeat the other party, at least escaping should not be a problem. So, let's make a deal, okay? No matter what kind of wish you have, as long as you can give up on being enemies with us now, then after we succeed, we will definitely help you fulfill it. Chapter 464. Su Shenxing was such a righteous protagonist, so he naturally wouldn't agree to such a dirty deal. Although he also thought of making a wish such as making his hair thicker so that his hairline wouldn't be too high in the future, but seeing how the other party's own world was shattered like the fragrant chicken that Emily tore apart, he reckoned that he couldn't fulfill this wish that even the grand wishing spell couldn't fulfill. Not to mention that a bunch of Mid-Serta elders were stuffed under Su Shenxing's feet right now. Actually, I'm quite curious, why did you do such a thing? Su Shenxing asked the other party. Although he didn't have the special skill of being able to speak in the sea of ether like the other party, he felt that the other party could most likely hear his voice. In addition, the other party thought that he hid it well, but no matter how you looked at it, it seemed like he was stalling for time.
Su Shenxing felt that he was very likely to answer his question, and answer it very carefully, like a certain author who broke down 1,000 words into 2,000 words. If it's just a problem of the world collapsing, with your technology, it shouldn't be difficult to at least move out of that world, right? Although he knew from Old Man Who that the other party's main technology was stolen from the Mid-Serta Magic Research Society, but being able to leave one's own world was an undeniable requirement. Even in some of the sovereign worlds of Mid-Serta, the leading technological civilization hadn't been able to reach this step. Because the existence of Loren Visa must not be known by Mid-Serta. Sure enough, the other party didn't hesitate at all and slowly told him. Why? As far as I know, although Mid-Serta can't be considered as a particularly benevolent civilization, they aren't that harsh to other civilizations? Su Shenxing gave him face and continued to ask. This was indeed Su Shenxing's feeling, although he didn't think much of Mid-Serta's establishment of the Space Administration, which was like the lighthouse nation on Earth, acting as the dimensional police. He had to admit that they did a good job. At least from what Su Shenxing knew,
Mid-Serta didn't point at other civilizations and say that they were hiding large-scale dimensional destructive weapons, then directly slap them, and finally destroy the civilization without finding anything. Of course, Su Xinqing's own situation was a special case. Of course, to pretend to be a big brother in front of others, naturally, you can't show your cruel and vicious side in the past. Although the other party understood how terrifying Su Xinqing was, when he mentioned Mid-Serta, he couldn't help but have some sarcasm in his words. And the only thing Su Xinqing thought was, F***ck, even a big brother has come out, my translation protection is becoming more and more unreliable. Because Su Xinqing's mind was wandering, the other party couldn't wait for him to continue, so he could only continue with a bitter smile. Now, I'm afraid no one can know that the first civilization to successfully cross the world was not Mid-Serta, but us Loren Visa. What? Su Xinqing blinked and was a little confused. At first, he thought he would hear a sad drama like The Revenge of the Prince, but he didn't expect it to be a big news. Tens of thousands of years ago our world Loren Visa was hit by another world, but because it wasn't a physical impact, there was only a slight deviation in the cosmological constant. At that time, our scientists successfully opened the door to the other world that hit Loren Visa through the analysis of this error. We are not greedy for the resources of other worlds because we have inexhaustible resources in our own world. The reason why we go back to study the way to go to other worlds is purely out of curiosity. However, it was precisely this kind of blessed world that was targeted by the evil creatures of that world. It's a kind of supergiant space monster that can parasitize planets and use the planet's core as nourishment. Because of their size, although they have developed a preliminary social form, their science is not developed. Most of their life is either dormant or feeding on planets, or wandering in the universe, looking for the next target to feed on. Obviously, their world is not as rich as ours, so after the door to this world was opened, Loren Visa was quickly spied on by those uninvited guests. At that time, we were not a warlike race, and we didn't even have decent warships. We encountered those monsters that could feed on planets, and the situation was almost one-sided against us. Our colonial planets were destroyed one after another, and countless of our compatriots died in that war. And our entire universe was shrouded in the shadow of that monster. Speaking of this, Dagita gasped as if he was trying to suppress the hatred in his heart that was about to turn into a substance. The scientist who caused all this wanted to use his research results to expel the other party from our world, but he failed, and in turn, made the other party realize that we have weapons in our hands that can cause harm to them. So the second round of massacre came again. This time, they stole our technology along with it, leaving behind only a devastated world. After all this was over, they withdrew from our world. When we thought the disaster was over, they used our law weapons to destroy our world, making our world what you see now. But they didn't expect that Loren Visa, who fell into the dark area, was not destroyed. Even if we are walking on the edge of destruction, we are still strong and alive. Because we have to live. Only by living can we turn our hatred into the flames of revenge, and turn those monsters, those Mid-Serta people into ashes. From that day on, the old Loren Visa had died, and the new Loren Visa woke up from the nightmare. Revenge is our ultimate goal. In the end, the other party even became a little hysterical. He looked at the silent Su Xinqing, then calmed down slightly and asked in a cold voice, "Even so, you won't get out of my way? Even so, you will continue to protect those monsters that have turned our civilization into such a distorted appearance?" Chapter 465. Although I sympathize with your experience, Su Xinqing was silent for a moment after listening to the other party's narration. He continued, "But only the Mid-Serta people are guilty, right? Do you know how many people from the other worlds have died because of your actions this time?" "I don't know." "Well, actually I don't know either." In the face of the other party's stiff and obvious refusal, Su Xinqing just shrugged. "But there must be a lot of them. Revenge is never just." "Then you have no reason to stop me from stopping you from committing murder, right?" Su Xinqing said somewhat tongue-twisting words and summoned Roland Dur again at the same time. "It seems that in the end, you still can't understand our difficulties." The other party was silent for a moment, and then revealed undisguised hostility in his eyes. No, I understand that you're sincere." Su Xinqing grinned. "That's why I gave you so much time to prepare." Then, the smile on his face disappeared without a trace. As long as you can defeat me, no one will care what you do. What do you mean by that? The messenger of justice? The other party asked indifferently. No, to be honest, I'm not good at judging what's the right thing to do. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made so many mistakes in the past. But there's only one thing I'm sure of. Su Shenxing raised the golden sword in his hand that looked quite luxurious. I will stop the destruction of the world. Is that so? The savior? Is this the philosophy you insist on? The other party pondered over Su Shenxing's words and muttered to himself. Then he raised one of his hands. In fact, long before Su Shenxing spoke, Dajita had already issued the order to use other decisive weapons other than Roland, Vesa, and Apocalypse. For a weapon that could be used as a decisive weapon by a super-civilization that could transcend worlds, putting aside its power for the time being, there would definitely not be too many types of weapons. Other than the Apocalypse, that was further developed from the research results stolen from the Magic Science Research Society, there were 3 other such weapons. Furthermore, unlike the Apocalypse, all 3 of them were single-use weapons. Otherwise, the invasion of the Mid-Serta world would not have only used the Apocalypse cannon. It's coming, Savior. Do you still have enough power? He raised his head. His young face was full of seriousness and solemnity. Just like that, he looked at Su Shenxing and shouted. At the same time, he used all the strength in his body to wave down the raised hand. The action of waving his hand wasn't purely to show off. In fact, this was also the permission to use the decisive weapon. And at that moment, under the guidance of Dajita's will, Loren Wizard's strongest spear was aimed at Su Shenxing. One of them was called Sword of Reason. The full name is Tweezers of the World Law, which is based on the half-destroyed laws of the Loren Visa world, and is a law destruction weapon jointly developed by all scientists. Unlike the Apocalypse, which specifically attacked things in the world, the Sword of Reason targeted the gaps between the worlds and the existence in the void. Things that could move in the void and not be swallowed by the ether and the void almost all existed in a state of self-consistency. In fact, the spaceships of the Mid-Serta world were basically built on this basis. The Sword of Reason would not cause any damage to the object itself, but it could be like a tweezer. It could pick up a certain law existing in the target and destroy the self-consistency of the law of the target, causing it to self-destruct in the void. Anything that existed in the void would basically be destroyed by the Sword of Reason, including most of the worlds. Because the core of the Sword of Reason was a fragment of the world, it was very difficult to create. So far, Dajita had only found one fragment of the world that met the requirements. Because of this, even if it had the power to destroy the world, considering various circumstances, for example, it might be affected by the interference field of the planet fortress, causing the tweezers to pick up the wrong target and so on. Only one of its reserves could not be used as a risk. Therefore, it was not used as the main force to attack the Mid-Serta world. The Sword of Reason was invisible, but Su Shenxing still felt a little strange. So he raised the hilt and blocked it with some doubts. As a result, Dajita felt that he seemed to hear a chirp, or the sound of glass breaking. Even so, he knew that it was an illusion. There was no sound in the world canyon, and even his conversation with the Savior was conducted in another form. Then he received a signal from Loren Visa. The Sword of Reason burned because of overload. The reason seemed to be that the quality of the other party's law was too high. It was probably the feeling that tweezers could pick up beans, but could not pick up the whole world. It doesn't matter. The second weapon is myself. Dajita's strength skyrocketed, and even his originally well-built body turned into a super macho man's body with muscles and muscles intertwined. Not only that, but then a box that looked like a cocoon was pushed to Dajita's side by the dimensional drone, and a set of dark golden armor was released. After a short moment of automatic dressing, the person in front of Su Shenxing became a combination of a Super Loren Visa and a Golden X-Fighter. And Su Shenxing could feel that the other party's armor seemed to contain world-level power. When did world-level power become so common? I didn't expect to use tyranny. The old man, who was a retainer of the Loren Visa royal family, who was also the Rodabaz mentioned by Dajita, had wrinkles all over his face as he stared at the screen covered with snow. Due to the interference of ether and void energy, even a live broadcast could not be made. Brother is the strongest in the world. The little girl named Tarble shouted stubbornly. It's absolutely impossible to lose. Yes, His Majesty is the strongest in the world. The old man comforted her. But he was not very optimistic about this point. Only in this world.
I hope that the armor that His Majesty imitated, that one, can defeat this enemy that suddenly appeared. Or else. The old man's eyes fell on the little girl in front of him.
Emily, send me over. Although the other party's armor was good, Su Shenxing did not take it seriously.
What made him serious was that he could feel the determination to die from the other party.
Did he fight with the belief that he would defeat him at the cost of dying together with him? Su Shenxing was not clear about this, but since the other party had shown such determination, then he could not fight with a contemptuous attitude.
This was the respect that should be given to a warrior, and it was also the romance that was engraved in Su Shenxing's bones as a warrior.
Sure enough. Because my first profession was a warrior, this kind of habit can't be changed no matter what. Landlord. Emily gave Su Shenxing a thumbs up. Good luck. Su Shenxing thought that he should have wanted to say good luck, but remembered the wrong word. It seemed that he had to go back and supervise Emily's schooling. Without waiting for Su Shenxing to remind him, Emily used his magic to throw him out. At the same time, Dagita activated what seemed to be a propulsion device and flew directly towards Su Shenxing. Messiah! Oh!
One person roared while the other remained silent.
The two people passed by each other in the void. In the next moment, a crack appeared on Dagita's armor. His flesh and blood spurted out from the crack and was instantly swallowed by the void. It had to be said that this king's vitality was very strong. Even so, he did not die immediately. Instead, he gave Su Shenxing a sad smile.
Sure enough, I can't defeat you like this.
Feel proud. Su Shenxing raised his head and let the other party see his collar. A corner of it had been cut off. You are the first person in the past 3 years who has come close to injuring me. Is that so? Is that so? Is this enough for me to feel proud? The other party said with a sad smile. But soon his expression became twisted and full of malice. But it's not over yet. Prepare yourself, Savior. You are about to face the world's most evil and strongest weapon. Su Shenxing was puzzled by his strong malice. But then he realized something and turned his head to look at the apple-shaped world that was the background of their battle. He did not know when it started, but a circle of strange white rings appeared around that world. They looked a bit like a space station, but they did not have any signs of life. They revolved around that world, like countless girls wearing white ballet dresses dancing around that dark red world. But what surprised Su Shenxing the most was the strange energy that connected those white rings. That was an energy that Su Shenxing had never seen before. That energy was not strong, but it made Su Shenxing feel disgusted from the bottom of his heart. Then, he realized something. You. Could it be? Haha. How do you feel, Savior? What are you going to do in the face of this final attack? If you dodge, Mid-Serta will be completely destroyed. King Loren, who only had a little bit of life left, showed a mocking expression to Su Shenxing. This is the last surprise I left for you. This is the last majesty of Loren. The glory belongs to Loren. Loren's world was moving forward and gradually accelerating. That was Loren's final weapon. That was the ultimate means of shooting at the enemy with the entire Loren world as a weapon. That was the strongest weapon made by Loren by using the world as a cannonball. That was what the person who developed this weapon called it. That was Wreath for the World. Chapter 466. Su Shenxing knew very well why the other party showed such a mocking attitude. When the world itself was used as a weapon to bombard him, there were only 2 choices in theory: avoid or block it. But if he avoided it, as the other party said, the Loren Visa world would crash straight into the world of Mid-Serta. Even if the world of Loren Visa had become on the verge of destruction, it was still a huge world after all. If this really happened, then the consequences would only be the destruction of both worlds. And if he chose to block the Loren Visa world as a weapon, the impact on the world itself was almost the same as directly destroying the world. Dagita didn't know if Su Shenxing had the strength to block Loren Visa, but this didn't prevent him from understanding that no matter which path he chose, at least one world would be destroyed. This was undoubtedly the biggest irony for Su Shenxing, who had just claimed that he wanted to stop the destruction of the world. I see, Su Shenxing nodded slightly, and then as if he finally understood the current situation, he showed a slightly cold expression. I thought you were just blinded by revenge. But in fact, as you said yourself, your mind has long been distorted by the idea of revenge, and you have become a complete monster.
Even if Su Shenxing didn't know if the other party's family or important people still existed in that world, but the guy who could make the whole world as a weapon, even if he had to drag all the people to be buried with him, to achieve his goal, in Su Shenxing's cognition, was no longer worthy of being called a person. However, subconsciously putting me on the same level as you, and putting the problem you think can't be solved in front of me, do you want to stump me? Su Shenxing shook slightly, and the holy sword of the end in his hand disappeared. Then he opened his hand towards the dark red world that was gradually getting bigger in his field of vision. Aren't you looking down on me too much? After that, his open right hand suddenly closed. In the next moment, the Loren Visa world disappeared. It hadn't been moved to another place by Su Shenxing, nor had it been blasted to smithereens by his attack. Instead, it had suddenly disappeared just like that. Although Dagita found that his connection with Loren Visa had been cut off, as the former owner of the world, he could still vaguely feel that the world had not been destroyed.
What?
Su Shenxing noticed that Dagita's words were mixed with strange gibberish. Perhaps it was because he had taken a blow from Su Shenxing's sword, causing his equipment to be damaged. He gradually lost the ability to speak between worlds. His words were affected by the void and ether, forming a language that even Su Shenxing's protection could not recognize. But even so, Su Shenxing could roughly guess what was going on with his widened eyes, as though he would definitely die with a grievance if he was dog-leading now. So he opened his right hand again. An egg-sized round crystal ball-like thing appeared in his hand. In the crystal ball, there was a dark red piece that looked like an apple core. At first glance, it looked as beautiful as a work of art. That's right, in that moment, Su Shenxing used Mo Li's power to turn the Loren Visa world into a lattice world. Dagita seemed to say something in shock, but unfortunately, Su Shenxing could no longer hear his voice. And this poor person whose mind was distorted by hatred and turned into a vengeful monster's corpse floated in the empty void. Finally, it was slowly swallowed by the sea of ether and disappeared. After Su Shenxing quietly watched all of this, he turned around and threw the lattice world of Loren Visa to Mo Li. Mo Li, catch.
Oh whoa.
Mo Li, who was sitting on the bridge watching Su Shenxing in boredom, suddenly jumped up like a puppy receiving food, raised his head and swallowed the crystal ball. Wait, that can't be eaten, spit it out.
Bah.
If the lattice world itself didn't have all the abilities of a complete world, including the ability to resist external interference, just now, the world that Su Shenxing saved with great difficulty would have to die with the Broom Prince. After Su Shenxing returned to the bridge with Mo Li, everyone looked at them as if they were looking at monsters. After all, what just happened in front of them was too mysterious. The crazy move of using the whole world as a weapon, and the ordinary carbon-based creature that easily resolved the crazy attack. Not only is this not scientific, but it's also not magic. Old man who of the Magic Science Research Society was still muttering. Only Lux, who vaguely understood that Su Shenxing was not an ordinary person from the last 4 yuan whale incident, didn't seem to have such exaggerated changes. He even secretly pouted at Su Shenxing. As for being treated as a monster by everyone, Su Shenxing didn't feel like abandoned by the world, or lonely and cold. After all, he was already used to it. Even Mo Li didn't react to it. Well, this girl was the type who didn't care about other people's feelings except for Su Shenxing. What should we do now? Lux asked Su Shenxing. Send us home first. Although I really want to say this, let's go back to Mid-Serta first. Su Shenxing sighed. He could finally do this in the bridge with air, and then said, "Isn't your original star still under attack?" After all, even if Su Shenxing had already destroyed the enemy's nest, and was almost eaten by Mo Li, the enemy's warships that had long since warped away were still besieging the original star. Not only that, but there seemed to be fighting in many places in Mid-Serta. Compared to the original star that still has power, I think the situation in other places seems to be more disadvantageous. At this time, a clear voice came from the ship's communicator. Then, the figure of a little girl appeared on the screen.
Ing?
Su Shenxing narrowed his eyes and felt that the other party's appearance seemed to be a little different from when she was on Earth. Did you change your appearance? This is the after effect of my blossoming halfway as the cancer of the world. The girl was so distressed that she pulled her long ponytail behind her cloak, and then continued, "If we don't hurry up and support those places, there may be more casualties after the fall." Everyone in the bridge focused their eyes on Su Shenxing, and the latter spread his hands,
indicating that he had no objection. But your detection system is down, right?
Then how do you determine where the enemy is fighting with the garrison?
Su Shenxing asked again.
Previously, I asked Violet to do a simple information analysis on Mid-Serta that has lost its interference position, and combined with that person just now.
The girl paused, and this made Su Shenxing realize that she was talking about Dog Leading's Digesta.
Based on what he said, I roughly figured out the enemy's attack plan.
Based on what?
The Mid-Serta people. They want to kill all the Mid-Serta people in this era.
But you're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel.
We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.